Chapter 624. Shui Rui went to the Supreme Court prison early in the morning and interrogated a few prisoners there before returning to the administration office. Not long after he sat down to read the statement, a bailiff came over to report that someone had come to the yamen in front to look for him. The bailiff didn't say who it was and just waited outside the main entrance. Shui Rui asked about the bailiff's appearance and had a rough idea of who it was, so he asked the bailiff to lead the bailiff to the second yamen to watch tea. He arrived soon after and was not surprised to see Jiang Mia standing in the back hall in dark green riding attire. "Why are you looking for me?" Jiang Mia held the handle of the shiny whip at her waist and raised her thick eyebrows. She sized up his dignified appearance with his official robes and black veil. She said in a bad mood, "Do I have to look for you only if I have something to say? My mother has been in the capital for a few days and she has not waited for you to greet her. She thinks that you do not want others to know about your relationship with Imperial Brother, so I came to ask if that is the case. If that is really what you think, I will pretend that I do not know you in the future." Shui Rui seemed as if he didn't hear her ridicule, and he walked over to sit on a chair before he said to her, "I took over a murder case not too long ago and I'm currently investigating it, so I couldn't get away for some time. That's why I wasn't able to personally welcome the old madam. It's my fault and I'll surely pay a visit to apologize another day." Actually, a few days after Madame Wei arrived in Anling, Shui Rui had sent someone to send a letter to explain the situation. He also sent a pair of eloquent parrots to make the old madam happy. Therefore Jiang Mia's visit today was really looking for trouble. It was because Jiang Mia was used to making trouble without reason that Shui Rui did not expose her so that she would not pursue the matter endlessly. As expected, Jiang Mia gave him a look that said, "At least you are sensible," and the corners of her mouth curled up. She said, "It is already noon. I am hungry. Let's go. Bring me to your restaurant for a rare meal and I will not bicker with you for making my mother sad." Shui Rui was ready to return to Forgotten Machine Tower. Hearing this, he had her wait for a while and went to the back to change into a set of casual clothes. The two of them walked out of the administration office and bumped into Yu Shu, who was also looking for someone. The three of them looked at each other. Yu Shu looked at Shui Rui, then looked at Jiang Mia. Seeing that the two of them were together, she did not think much of it. She was only stunned for a moment before she smiled and greeted, "What a coincidence. Where are you going?" Shui Rui hadn't seen Yu Shu for a few days. Now that he saw her, his eyes stopped on her face. Even his voice was much gentler than usual. "I was just about to have lunch. You came just in time. Let's go to Wangji Tower." Jiang Hua also said, "That's right, let's go together." Yu Shu naturally wouldn't refuse, so she turned around. They walked abreast to the side of the street, which was not far from the Rue Tourmalin. There was no need for a carriage. Jiang Mia stretched out her hand and placed it on Yu Shu's shoulder before she walked in between Yu Shu and Shui Rui. She blinked at Yu Shu before moving close to her ear and asking, "Have you gotten your 60,000 taels of gambling debt? Do you need my help?" Yu Shu smiled, "No need. I have discussed it with them. They don't intend to renege on the debt. Let them slowly pay it back." Jiang Hua looked disappointed. Ever since she came to the capital, she couldn't go to the military camp. She couldn't even find a live target to practice her whip, which made her feel uncomfortable. She couldn't wait to take revenge for Yu Shu and cause some trouble. "Alright then. If they try to play tricks, don't be afraid. Tell me earlier and I will help you vent your anger." Shui Rui heard their conversation and was amused. Jiang Hua, this tigress, treated Shu as a stray cat and still wanted to protect her. After walking for a short distance, Jiang Hua noticed that there were people behind her. She turned around and saw two men who looked like guards with sabers on their waists following them at a distance. She thought that they were following Shui Rui and didn't think much of it. The three of them wandered all the way to the Rue Tourmalin, but halfway there, they followed Jiang Hua into a noisy tavern. In Jiang Hua's words, it was lively here and the more people there were, the better the taste of drinking. It wasn't that Wangji Tower wasn't lively, but that the food was more expensive than gold. The people who came here were rich and well-educated. When they ate, they didn't talk much and didn't have the atmosphere of a marketplace. It wasn't as noisy as an ordinary place. When it was time for lunch, the seats downstairs were already full. The waiter led them up to the second floor and near the fence, they met a table of customers who had finished eating and were paying their bills. It could be said that they found a good seat. Jiang Hua couldn't wait and ordered a jar of good wine. Before the dishes were served, she filled her own cup and drank it in one gulp. She let out a long sigh of relief and complained to Shui Rui, "Ever since I came to the capital, my mother has been stricter than my eldest brother. She doesn't even let me drink spicy wine. It's as if she's afraid that I'll go out with a knife and kill people when I'm drunk. Yushu burst into laughter. Shui Rui shook his head and sighed inwardly. Isn't Madame Wei afraid that you'll cause trouble? As Jiang Mia spoke, she downed another glass. With one arm on the railing, she tilted her head in satisfaction and listened to the storyteller, who was surrounded by people downstairs telling a story. The storyteller was saying, "That Dong-ing kid, holding a white candle in one hand and a talisman in the other, was babbling nonsense to the dog cage. No one could understand." Jiang Hua turned her face to the two people at the same table and said, "This is a story from the Water and Land Conference in the palace. I heard it with my mother in a tea house 2 days ago. It said that there's an extraordinary person in the Celestial Commissioner who can call the wind and summon the rain and cast beans to form soldiers. She was given the title of Miaoling Messenger by His Majesty. It said that this person has a deity as her master. She's well versed in astronomy and geography. She also has the ability of the King of Hell and can determine people's life and death. It's rare that she's actually a woman. Tiske, I really want to see if this deity's disciple is born with 3 heads and 6 arms." Yushu and Shui Rui also heard the storyteller downstairs and Jiang Hua's joke. Their expressions turned slightly strange. Yushu asked Shui Rui with her eyes, "She's talking about me, right?" Shui Rui hesitated and thought, "It should be you, right?" Jiang Hua didn't notice the strange expressions on the two people's faces. She excitedly asked Yushu, "Lotus Room, you also learned E. Have you heard of this Miaoling messenger? Quick, tell me, is she really that godly?" Yushu was instantly distressed. How was she supposed to answer this? Tell Jiang Hua that she wasn't the 3rd prince of Neza and didn't have 3 heads? Ha ha ha. Shui Rui couldn't restrain his laughter, and he only stopped laughing when Yushu stepped on his foot under the table. He said to the baffled Jiang Ya, "Since you've heard of this joke, then haven't you heard of the name of this Miaoling emissary?" Jiang Hua rubbed her wine cup and recalled, "Oh, I remember they said that this person is the female fortune teller in this year's Dian examination. What's her surname again? Don't panic. Let me think, I know. Her surname is Yu." Shui Rui kindly reminded her. Jiang Hua slammed the table hard and said, "That's right, her surname is Yu. It's Yu Swansea." The people at the next table glanced at them. Chapter 625. When the 3 of them came out of the tavern, Jiang Mia still found it unbelievable. She frequently looked at Yushu and found it hard to associate this ordinary-looking little girl with the immortal disciple who could summon the wind and summon the rain. However, Shui Rui said it himself. How could it be false? Today was also the first time that Yushu heard rumors about her. Even she felt that it was exaggerated, let alone Jiang Mia. She did not humbly explain to Jiang Mia that she was not that powerful. She could only sigh in her heart. Emperor Zhaoqing really spared no effort in promoting himself in order to prove his reputation as a wise ruler. Lu Hong and Su Qing were waiting outside the tavern. They bought a few donkey barbecued meat for lunch. When they saw Yushu and the others coming out, they went up to them. "My lord, where are we going? Are we taking a carriage?" It was only then that Jiang Qia realized that the 2 of them were not following Shui Rui but Yushu's people instead. She had a strange feeling in her heart. While Yushu was talking to the 2 guards, she turned around and gritted her teeth as she said to Shui Rui, "Good job, Shui Dalong. Why didn't you tell me earlier? You made me lose face in front of others." At first, she thought that Yushu was a little teacher who was lucky to become sworn brothers with Shui Rui. She also felt that Yushu was climbing up the social ladder. She was also dissatisfied with Shui Rui. Her imperial brother had an adopted sister for no reason. She only thought that Yushu had gotten a big bargain. Therefore she looked down on Yushu. Although they exchanged names, it was mostly because of Shui Rui. Who would have thought that the other party was not as high as the mountain? It seemed that she was a little cautious. Shui Rui smiled faintly and did not explain. He knew very well what Jiang Mia thought of Yushu. He naturally had his own considerations for not reminding her at the beginning. Because of this little interlude, Jiang Mia didn't get to drink to her heart's content. She felt a little awkward in front of Yushu, so she excused herself and left. Yushu followed Shui Rui back to Wangji Tower. On the way she asked him, "Did she find out that I am the Miaoling emissary?" "Sorry to disappoint Hualan. I saw that she ran quite fast." Shui Rui scanned her untidy appearance from head to toe and advised her with a deadpan expression. "When you go back, you should cut a few more good pieces of cloth. Didn't you win a sum of money just because of your talent? Don't be frugal with those few taels of silver and tidy yourself up. At the very least, don't disgrace the title bestowed by the emperor when you go out." How could Yushu not hear his teasing? She put her elbow on his waist, stared at him with a smile and whispered, "It's too late for you to despise me now." When Shui Rui heard this, a layer of a gentle smile appeared on his handsome face. The two returned to Wangji Tower. After separating the spies outside and closing the door, Yushu asks Shui Rui about the progress of the murder case in Taisha Shuyuan. Shui Rui shakes his head and says, "There are suspects, but it doesn't look like it. There is no evidence to identify the murderer, so it's not easy to investigate." Compared to the commotion caused when Chao Yuling was killed, Zhan Shuyuan's death can be said to be quiet. The Zhan family is a prominent family in Jiangxi, but it doesn't have any power in the capital. Just like the Wenshan family in the north and the Xiao family in the south, the local Ishua family, no matter how famous they are, they can't reach into Enling. If they reach over, the first to be unhappy is not the emperor, but the 12 prefectures of the capital, who will join hands to cut them off. Therefore, when Chao Yuling's accident happened, the Chao family in the capital could stand up for her, causing Emperor Zhao Qing to order a month to limit Shui Rui to solve the case. However, Zhan Shuyuan died in the capital, and her family is far away in Jiangxi. It will take some time for them to rush over, so no one forced Shui Rui to solve the case as soon as possible. Moreover, there are the shadows of the traitors who plotted against Jing Qin. Emperor Zhao Qing and the ruler and official, this ruler and official may have some plans. Why would they really rely on an unknown person like Shui Rui to solve the case? Yushu frowns and says, "If only Ji Xingxuan hadn't been rescued by Ning Wang. She must know something, and if we can get one or two out of her, we wouldn't be so blind." Speaking of Ji Xingxuan, Yushu didn't know if she should be happy that she brought it on herself, or angry that she had escaped a calamity. Sometimes she really wondered if Ji Xingxuan had a pair of eyes in the front and back, which was why she was diagnosed to be pregnant with Ning Wang's child at the critical moment of life and death. Shui Rui says in a low voice, "At the beginning, His Majesty had sent a secret decree for Ning Wang to take away Ji Xingxuan. At that time they hadn't confirmed who the person who broke the fate was, so His Majesty's favoritism towards Ning Wang prevailed, so he let Ji Xingxuan go. But now you, the person who broke the fate, have almost been exposed. Ning Wang is an unborn child, so it isn't important. In my view, His Majesty may be regretting not following the trail of Ji Xingxuan. Who knows when he will ask Ning Wang for the person?" Yushu hesitantly asks, "You mean the emperor will privately send people to investigate Ji Xingxuan again?" Shui Rui nods. Instantly, Yushu couldn't tell if this was good news or bad news. The good news was that if they could find the murderer hiding in Taisha Shu Garden from Ji Xingxuan, the one who wanted to kill the person who broke the fate, she, the real one, would be safe. The bad news was that when Emperor Zhao Qing uprooted that group of thieves, they would be able to put her and Jing Qin together without any qualms. Shui Rui looks at Yushu's fluctuating expression and suddenly asks, "Ashu, have you thought about why that group of people in the dark want to target Jing Qin, find the person who broke the fate and harm the innocent?" Yushu raises her eyebrows. "Didn't they say that they are rebels? They know that Jing Qin, this great calamity, can control the fate of the country, and is closely related to the life and death of the person who broke the fate, so they want to attack him so that they can rebel in the future." Shui Rui's eyes light up. If that's the case, why don't they just kill Jing Qin, this great calamity, to their heart's content? Why do they have to find you, the person who broke the fate? You said that Jing Qin's search for the person who broke the fate in Yiyang was fruitless, and as soon as he left, he was plotted against. After being seriously injured, he was abandoned on the river. But when you saved him, he was still breathing and his acupuncture points were pierced with silver needles, causing him to lose his memory and speech. If someone wanted to kill him, why did they need to do so? Yushu is stunned. After hearing his words, she also feels strange. Yes, if that group of people wanted to kill the person who broke the fate to rebel, why didn't they just kill Jing Qin, this great calamity, to their heart's content? Why did they leave him alive? She had never thought about this question carefully before. It was because after Jing Qin regained his memories, he could not clearly remember the part where he was being hunted down in the south. Thus, she had subconsciously thought that he had escaped death. She had never thought that someone had purposely left him alive. But why didn't they kill Jing Qin but kill her, the person who broke the fate? Why am I getting more and more confused? Big brother, if they didn't want a rebel, then why? Since it is related to her, her mind is a little confused. When she looked up, she saw Shui Rui staring at her faintly, and his words are shocking. Why don't you change your way of thinking? Whether the person behind the scenes wants to rebel or not, it is true that he wants to obstruct the current emperor and the celestial commissioner, but he doesn't want Jing Qin to die, so he can only kill the person who broke the fate. Who would not want to kill Jing Qin, but also think of ways to destroy it? Yushu's eyelids twitched under his gaze, and a person popped up in her mind. Her mouth doesn't listen to her, it opened and closed, and she said this person at the same time as Shui Rui. Yunhua. Chapter 626. It was late at night. Yushu tossed and turned and could not fall asleep. Her mind was filled with the conversation she had with Shui Rui during the day. It was one thing to know that Yunhua was not dead, but it was another thing to suspect that he was the culprit behind the two murders in Taishu Shuyuan. In Yushu's understanding, Yunhua, the eldest senior brother whom she had never met, was a person with a good reputation when he was alive. When he was dead, he was also a legend. He was definitely not related to the murderer at all. If it was really Yunhua, then Yushu could only praise him for being ruthless. In order to stop the Don Calamity from losing his life, he could even lay his hands on his own son Jingqin. He beat him half to death and threw him into the river. It was fortunate that she picked him up and brought him back. Otherwise she would have fed him to the fish. If it was not Yunhua, then if he did not die 20 years ago, where was he hiding for the past 20 years? Yushu thought for a night. The next day she had a pair of black eyes. When Shui Rui saw this, he was quite regretful. He thought that he should not have told her before he found out the truth. He comforted her and said, "It's just a speculation. Don't take it to heart." Yushu shook her head. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that Jing Chen's murder and the murders in Taishu Shuyuan had something to do with Yunhua. The biggest possibility was that Yunhua exposed his purpose of destroying the Book of Mystery Woman's 6 Rens and was killed by the royal family of Dan. After he escaped, he concealed his identity and secretly made arrangements. He waited until Jing Chen, the Calamity of Dan, came down from Mount Longhu before he took action. Jing Chen told her that Titian once said that the Dan Calamity only appeared once in 100 years. It was fate, but it was also a predestined fate. According to the time, Jing Chen should be the third calamity that appeared since the founding of the Dan Kingdom. However, the Fate Breaker did not seem to appear together with the calamity. Only the calamity could see the Fate Breaker from the imperial tombs. Therefore, Yunhua must have known that Jing Chen's son was a troublemaker when he was born. He could not destroy the Book of Mystic Maiden's 6 Rens, but he knew the secret of this book, so he changed his goal to stop the troublemaker from destroying his life. He could not bear to kill his own son, so he could only wait for the day Jing Chen found the person who would destroy his life, and then he would make a move against the person who would destroy his life. Thinking about it this way, the most crucial part of the Book of the Mysterious Maiden Lu Ren should be the great calamity of An Dynasty. It was related to the fate of An Dynasty, it was related to the peace of the world. Qing Zheng's obsession with destroying the Book of the Mysterious Maiden Lu Ren was very deep. Otherwise, he would not have sent his eldest disciple to take the risk to go to the capital. After 20 years, he accepted her as his disciple and sent her to the capital again. My master, Daoist Qing Zheng, knows fortune and misfortune and can judge life and death. Then he must be able to predict that Yunhua is not dead. However, from his tone at that time, he and Yunhua have been separated for many years and have not been able to meet again. That is to say, after Yunhua was in danger that year, his whereabouts were unknown, and he did not go back to find master. Yushu talked to herself. She always felt that Yunhua's obsession was somewhat inexplicable. He was ordered by his master to go to the capital to destroy the book, but he did not destroy the book. Instead, he lost his own son. Under the situation where he was surrounded by enemies on all sides, shouldn't he try to find a way to reunite with Daoist Qing Zheng? Yunhua was different from her. Qing Zheng said that he accepted this eldest disciple 30 years ago, which meant that he had taught him for at least 10 years. With such a master-disciple relationship, she did not believe that Qing Zheng would wash his hands of Yunhua like how he treated her. He would definitely leave him a way out and would not let him not be able to find her. However, after Yunhua died 20 years ago, he did not return to Qing Zheng's side. Instead, he chose to live in seclusion alone. The feeling he gave her was that he was deliberately avoiding Qing Zheng and did not want Qing Zheng to interfere with him. You seem to have mentioned that before Yunhua came to the capital in the past, he already had a wife? Shui Rui asked out of the blue. Yes, my master mentioned it in front of me. He said that my eldest senior brother had already married and had a child. Yushu recalled that when Qing Zheng mentioned Yunhua, he had a proud look on his face. Unfortunately, she drank a few mouthfuls of spicy wine at that time and fell asleep, so she did not hear the whole story. Then, where are Yunhua's first wife and child now? Yushu shook her head and said casually, maybe they are living well somewhere. Otherwise they are dead. Her words were stuck in her throat and she bit her tongue. Suddenly, a vague idea came to her mind and her eyes drifted around. She did not notice that Shui Rui, who was sitting opposite her, had a stern look on his face, and his eyes were slightly closed. There was a short silence between the two of them. Shui Rui said, "You have seen Yunhua's exam paper when he participated in the Grand Yen examination. Do you still remember where he came from?" "This happened more than half a year ago. Yushu used one of Yunhua's astrology exam papers to trick the Ji family. Now that exam paper had been destroyed. Fortunately, she had a good memory, so she did not forget it. I remember that it was written on that exam paper that he was from Changzhou." All the examinees of the Grand Yen examination were given an exam notice. There was no student number. All the exam papers were distinguished by their birthplace, name, and handwriting. "Changzhou?" Shui Rui muttered to himself. His heart was moved. He thought, Changzhou and Yiyang are adjacent to each other, less than 100 miles apart. Yunhua came to the capital with an ulterior motive, so his name and birthplace can be fake, but his accent and customs can't be too far from the truth. Could it be that he is actually from Yiyang? Didn't Shu also become his disciple in Yiyang City? Although that is what he wrote, who knows whether it is fake or not. Even the name Yun Mufeng might not be real. Yu Shu slightly twitched her mouth. She judged Yunhua from a woman's point of view. She felt that he was really a scumbag. He left his wife and child to go to the capital and became famous overnight. He became the son-in-law of the emperor, and he was in love with Princess Liyue and had a child. He had let down 2 women. Of his 2 sons, one was unknown whether he was alive or dead, and the other was cheated here and there. He was a terrible father. In comparison, Yunhua and Jingchen were really a pair of father and son. They both abandoned their own good lives for the sake of those incorporeal morality. "I will send someone to Changzhou to investigate as soon as possible. I will let you know when there is news." Shui Rui came back to his senses and said to her, "After breakfast, I will send you to the Celestial Commissioner's office." Yu Shu stayed at Wangji Tower yesterday and did not leave. Lu Hong and Su Qing were sent away by her. When she went out, Shui Rui had to personally send her off before she could rest assured. Because the speculation that Yunhua was the culprit was too scary, Yu Shu forgot to tell Shui Rui that she went to the palace and met Imperial Consort Shui. Shui Rui sent Yu Shu to the main entrance of the Celestial Commissioner's office. Before they parted, he reminded her, "You are in charge of the official marriage approval. If you see Jin Sun's 8 words calligraphy, temporarily suppress it. Remember to inform me." Yu Shu naturally agreed. She wanted to ask more, but Shui Rui had already closed the car door, turned around and left. Lu Hong and Su Qing were waiting at the entrance of the official office. They followed her inside. The 3 of them split up in the courtyard of the Kunling Bureau. Yu Shu went to work, and the 2 guards were ordered to stroll elsewhere and listen to the news. After entering the courtyard, Yu Shu raised her head and glanced at the window of the east building. Seeing that it was open, she knew that Jing Chen had arrived first. So she went upstairs first. In the same department, the lower officials had to report to their superiors in the morning and evening. This was the rule of the officialdom. "Good morning, Right Commander. Do you have any instructions today?" "There is nothing else, I will go." Jing Chen sat by the window and flipped through a book. A corner of his silver gauze robe hung to the ground. The embroidery of the Big Dipper Palace on his shoulder was illuminated by the morning light. His long hair was tied up and he wore no black gauze. His brows were like distant mountains, and there was a small shadow in his eyes. When he looked back, it was like autumn water. Such a pleasing man could only be watched from afar. Yu Shu sighed in her heart. Jing Chen looked at her, put down the scroll and said, "When I entered the palace yesterday, His Majesty was drafting an edict. The golden book and seal of your title have already been made by the Ministry of Rights. In the morning, someone from the palace will come to announce the edict. You should prepare." On the day of the Water and Land Conference, although Emperor Zhaoqing had personally conferred the title of Miaoling Messenger to Yu Shu, the imperial edict had not been written. It would take some time for the book and seal to be made. This was considered fast. "Thank you for telling me." Yu Shu smiled and turned to go downstairs. Jing Chen waited until she had disappeared before looking away. He looked at the book in his hand again, but he could not concentrate on reading it. These days, the only things that he looked forward to every day were the mornings and evenings. Even if he did not have anything to say, it was better than her ignoring him. Yu Shu went downstairs and found Xiaolan. She had him inform all the officials of the Kunling Bureau so that they would not be flustered when the imperial edict arrived. When it was almost noon, someone from the palace came to announce the imperial edict. The people of the Kunling Bureau all came out to receive the imperial edict at the door. The head eunuch holding the imperial edict read something in a genteel manner. Yushu did not understand, but she heard two key points. First, the title that Emperor Zhao Qing had given her was equivalent to a third-rank vassal. In other words, she had an additional allowance. In the future, when she saw officials below third rank, she could stand with her head held high. Second, other than this title, Emperor Zhao Qing also rewarded her with 100 taels of gold, a number of fine silk cloths, and the flag that she had used to summon the rain that day with the true dragon's command personally written on it. Yushu was extremely happy. Seeing the real benefits, she felt that the title was well-deserved. It was no longer a title that could not be used for eating and drinking. This subject thanks the emperor for his great kindness. Long live the emperor. Yushu knelt down to receive the imperial edict. She raised the silk cloths above her head. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. After two guards brought the gold and silver into the building, Yushu approached the head eunuch who was announcing the imperial edict. She stuffed the silver notes that she had prepared into the other's sleeves. With a smile, she made friends with this chief eunuch of the Bureau of Rights, Wang Fengtai Eunuch Wang. After the eunuch left, the people from the Kunling Bureau came forward to congratulate Yushu. Someone asked when Yushu was going to hold the banquet so that they could prepare a congratulatory gift and come to visit. Yushu thought about how the layout of the residence on Baochang Street was almost the same. She calculated the time of relocation and said to the crowd, "Find a good day in the middle of next month. Wait for me to send out an invitation." The circle of people dispersed in satisfaction. After a while, only Yushu and Jing Chen were left in the courtyard. "If you are going to hold a banquet, will you invite me?" Jing Chen asked. Yushu was in a good mood. When she heard this, she said, "Of course, I will invite you up the mountain to do me the honor." Jing Chen smiled and nodded, gesturing for her to enter. "Go in." Yushu walked behind him. She could not help but think, if Yunhua is really the mastermind behind the scenes, how will Jing Chen face him in the future? Chapter 627. Yushu got a big house on Baochang Street from Lu Tan after the Double Suns Festival in March. It took her 3 months to build it. Finally, at the end of July, it became the happy house she expected. The house had 4 entrances and the gate faced south. The 2 small gardens in the east and west of the central axis were connected with a veranda. Looking down from the sky, it looked like a fish jumping in the air. It was full of geomancy. The flowers and trees in the garden were transplanted from the Ministry of Works. The water from the pond was drained and the koi fish were fished from the center of Jade Lion Lake. She did not know how Pei Jing managed to smuggle a bunch of birds and beasts into the garden for her. There were mandarin ducks, white ducks, lark thrushes, cicadeer, squirrels, macaques, and the rarest of them all was a pair of white cranes. For this reason, he even found an experienced bird breeder for her. Most of the furniture in the house was ready-made, but there were a few rare top-grade ones. It was like the big 4-season bed made of rosewood in Yushu's bedroom. The 4 pillars were engraved with the scenes of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The 4 corners of the bed were hung with hollowed lampshades in the shape of bird's nest. At night, she lit the candles and lay on her back in the mosquito net. When she opened her eyes, she could see the changing of the 4 seasons. It was such a beautiful scene. This large bed was originally kept in the treasury of the Southern Cyanwood Forest Lumber Company, and it wasn't for sale. Shui Rui sent it over to Yushu with a note, and Yushu was extremely fond of it the moment she saw it, so she directly placed it in her room and used it as a bed. After the construction of the luxurious house was completed, the money flowed out like water. Yushu was distressed. But after looking around, she felt that it was worth it. It was really a good idea to spend money anywhere. Yushu took Zhao Hui and He Fangji to see the house first. After discussing with them, she started to pack up her belongings and luggage. Old Madame He was a little reluctant to live with her son and daughter-in-law, Yushu, a foreigner. But when she came to Baochang Street in person, she got rid of the grudge. Zhao Hui persuaded the old lady in private, "It's our family's blessing that Xiao Yu is so promising. But she and her brother are lonely and her mother is unreliable, so she is really close to us. Mother, you just need to treat her as your own granddaughter." "What's wrong?" "Besides, Xiaochuan has sisters and brothers like Xiao Yu and Xiaoxiu. Isn't it good to live together?" Old Madame He was open-minded after all. She had to think for He Xiaochuan, the only son of the He family. Yushu asked Jing Chen for leave in advance. On the day of the end of the month, she didn't go to the Celestial Commissioner's office. She got up early in the morning and was busy moving her belongings and luggage. The furniture on Baochang Street was complete. The family had started packing clothes and personal belongings a few days ago. After packing wooden boxes, They rented 3-horse carriages and were escorted by Lu Hong and Su Qing to move to the new house. Not to mention that it was a waste of talent to be guarded by a 7th-class bodyguard. Just the box of money that Yushu had saved for half a year was worth more than 10,000 taels of silver. The 3-horse carriages went back and forth 3 times before they finished moving the things. Half of them were gifts that Yushu had received in the past 2 months. There were all kinds of gifts, some of which hadn't even been opened yet. Along with them there was a basket full of visiting cards. It wasn't the first time that Yushu was fed up with receiving gifts. The last time was when she showed off her skill at the gentleman's hibiscus banquet. This time it was because she was in the limelight at the Water and Land Conference. Yushu followed them into the last carriage. She sat cross-legged in the carriage and casually flipped through the basket of cards by her feet. After the gentleman's hibiscus banquet, she had taken the time to organize the list. This time, because the Celestial Commissioner had taken office, she didn't have the time to organize it. As a result, it was piled up in a mess. She was even more unwilling to look at it in detail. Yushu knew that it wasn't a good idea for her to always turn a blind eye and only accept gifts while ignoring people. She still had to sort out these cards. She would reply to those that needed to be replied to, invite those that needed to be invited, and throw those that needed to be thrown away. It would be best if she could find someone to do it so that it wouldn't delay her business. Right now she only had one maidservant by her side, Yun Do. Yun Do was illiterate, so she couldn't count on her. She had to go to the Provision Institute as soon as possible and buy a few capable servants to order around. Yushu asked Shuirui for advice. It wasn't easy to set up one's own house. Having a house and money couldn't be spared. The most important thing was to choose and buy servants. She divided them into men and women, inner and outer courtyards, each with their own duties so that it wouldn't be a mess. According to the number of people in her family and the size of the house, she had to get at least 2 gatekeepers, 2 servants to clean the outer courtyard, and 2 maidservants to serve tea and pour water. Then there was the inner courtyard. Zhao Hui and her husband would have 1 courtyard. There would be guards, cleaners, servants and servants. There would be at least 4 people. Old Madame He's courtyard would also need 4 people. Adding on the kitchen staff, coachmen and gardeners, all of which were indispensable, there would need to be 20 to 30 servants in this big house, and this didn't include the number of guards. It took 3 days to tidy up the whole family. During this time, Yushu went to the Provision Institute twice and spent a few hundred taels of silver to buy more than a dozen people in one breath and stuff them into the new house. There was no need to go to the Provision Institute to choose those rough servants. They could just find a woman broker, and a slave contract would only cost 3 to 5 taels of silver. However, Yushu would rather spend a few more money to buy people who knew everything in the Provision Institute. She didn't spend the few hundred taels of silver in vain. When the steward of the Provision Institute saw her identity, he couldn't wait to curry favor with her. How could he dare to take advantage of her? Yushu didn't go alone. Instead she took Zhao Hui with her. When it came to housework, Yushu was ashamed to admit that she couldn't compare with Zhao Hui, who used to be a merchant's miss and was now a mother. Sitting in the heavenly room, there were a few teenage girls standing in a row in front of them. On the chair above, Zhao Hui turned her head and whispered to Yushu, "You have to choose a room to serve. You have to be smart, and the most important thing is to know your place. You can't tell whether it's good or bad. First, you have to choose the one you like. After coming in, you can't choose the second one on the left or the first one on the right." This was to choose a maidservant for Yushu to accompany Yun Do. In any case, she was a 5th-ranked female official. Compared to the example of a noble family, 2 maidservants were already shabby. Even Xen Lu, the daughter of a noble family, had 4 or 5 maidservants in the front and back of the house. Yushu still had the independent thoughts of a modern person. She didn't like others interfering in her private territory, but she had no choice. She became an official, so there were many chores that needed to be taken care of. If there was only Yun Do, that little maidservant would be exhausted to death. After looking around, Yushu asked 2 girls who were more pleasing to the eye if they could read. The 2 girls rushed to answer yes, so she asked them to write a few words. When she took the words in her hands, she saw that their handwriting was even worse than her beginner's. She frowned and turned to the steward standing at the side and said, "I asked you to find me a few literate people, but you let me see these inferior ones?" The steward could hear the dissatisfaction in her tone. He quickly smiled apologetically and explained, "Lady Darren doesn't know, but there aren't many literate maidservants. They are all here. It's not that this lowly one is being perfunctory, but if there are servants who can write and draw, they wouldn't just be sold for the price of a maidservant. Those were all women that rich men would pay a high price to buy to play with. If I want you to find them, just find them for me. Are you afraid that I can't afford the money? She mainly wanted to find someone to be her private secretary, so her requirements were naturally high. Lady Darren is joking, hee hee. The steward laughed dryly twice. Then please wait a moment, this lowly one will be back soon. Saying that, he took a group of girls out. Some of them saw that they couldn't follow such a good master like Yushu, so their eyes showed disappointment. When they walked to the door, they couldn't help but look back at Yushu pitifully. Chapter 628. The steward didn't dare to offend Yushu, so he quickly found a group of female slaves for her to choose from. Among them, there were many young ladies from official families who had been convicted and sold. Not only were they literate, but they were also proficient in the 4 arts. On the way, the steward kindly reminded them, the one who came back is the Celestial Commissioner, a female official of the 5th rank. She is quite famous in the capital. If she takes a liking to you, although you will only be ordered around as a servant, isn't it better than being a plaything for those rich men? Who knows, good days are waiting for you. Mother, for the sake of our relationship, will tell you the truth. It's fine as long as you know what to do. The group of girls responded in a low voice, each of them having their own considerations. The minister's quarters was very good at training people. When Yushu saw these spoiled girls in front of her, they didn't have the slightest bit of disobedience. They were abnormally well behaved and answered whatever she asked. When she asked them to write, one of them even wrote a poem on the spot. When she asked them what they could do, they were good at playing the zither, painting, needlework, and so on. This made Yundo, who was standing behind Yushu, very nervous. She was worried that her daughter would buy these maidservants who were several streets ahead of her and then look down on her in the future. In the end, Yushu chose 2 people. One was a 14-year-old girl with dark eyebrows and big eyes. She looked quite clever. The other was a bit older, about 17 years old. She looked gentle and quiet, spoke at a steady pace, and was very well behaved. Compared to the other girls waiting to be chosen, she was less nervous. For these 2 people, the steward asked for a total of 180 taels. On one hand, he was careful because he was afraid that Yushu would think it was too expensive. On the other hand, he was depressed. For such an upright and clean girl, if someone from a brothel came to pick her, they would have to pay 3 times the price. However, the owner heard that official Yu had come yesterday, so he specially sent someone over to tell them not to raise the price. It was fine to sell her half and give her half as gifts, but they must return with satisfaction. That's it. Yushu happily took out the banknotes, and the steward quickly handed over the 2's indenture and confession cards to her. Yushu asked Yundo to put it away and immediately changed the names of the 2 girls. She couldn't think of any elegant words, so she used the meaning of the 5 elements. The older one was called Exiner, and the younger one was called Lin-er. Seeing that Yushu specially gave them new names, Yundo quietly pouted. Exiner and Lin-er received 2 small bundles from the disciplinarian ant under the envious gazes of their friends. He followed behind Yushu. After exiting the heaven room, Xiaoqin passed through a drooping flower door and exited the backyard. Suddenly she heard a commotion. Yushu turned her head to look. From afar, she saw a figure crawling out from under the moon door on the other side of the corridor. He was limping towards her, and there were a few people chasing after him. The expression of the steward who led the way for Yushu changed. He turned to Yushu and smiled, "Madam, please don't be offended. Let's go this way." After saying that, he pointed to a corridor on the side. However, Yushu stood there without moving. Zhao Hui and the maidservants also stopped. Soon, the figure ran in front of her and was blocked by Yushu and the others. She stopped in a panic and raised her head. Her messy hair hung loosely over her shoulders. Between the strands of hair was a pair of abnormally bright eyes. Yushu was stunned for a moment. That person was also stunned. "Stop. Where are you going?" 2 tall and burly women also chased after her. The steward scolded in a low voice, "What are you doing? You're disturbing the honored guest. Hurry and take her away." Thus, the 2 women hurriedly grabbed the dazed person and secretly pinched her soft flesh. They dragged her away. After being pinched a few times, the person came back to her senses from the pain. She struggled weakly and turned her head. Her fearful eyes fell on Yushu. She straightened her neck and cried out in a pitiful voice, Save me." With a slightly stiff accent and a hoarse voice, it was hard to tell if it was a man or a woman. The steward coughed. One of the women hurriedly covered the person's mouth and used all her strength to drag her away. The person desperately twisted her neck and looked at Yushu with a look of despair. "Wait," Yushu said. "Madam? Let them bring the person over for me to take a look." The steward couldn't refuse her. After hesitating for a moment, she called the person back. Thus, the two women came back and brought the person in front of Yushu. The person's hair was unkempt and her legs were powerless as she knelt on the ground. Yushu squatted down and used one hand to brush the hair on her face and put it behind her ear, exposing her eyes and looking at her for a while. The steward was worried that she would misunderstand and quickly explained, "This is a sinner who has just been sold from prison and doesn't know the rules." The Duran laws were not harsh. The punishments were the same as the previous dynasty. They were divided into 5 levels: flogging, apprenticeship, exile, and death. The death penalty was rare, but those who were exiled would often be sold to a place to be a slave. The house of enslavement was one of those places. From Yushu's understanding, it was to deprive the person of their rights for life. Under her stare, the sinner stammered, "They took off my clothes, beat me, and even put their hands under me." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she bit her lips. She looked ashamed and indignant, unable to continue. Her clothes were so dirty that the color could not be distinguished. Because her collar was pulled open, it was difficult to hide the rising and falling curves of her chest, so people would not mistake her gender. Yushu's brows furrowed. The steward immediately felt awkward. All new female prisoners had to be checked to see if they were virgins or not. This wasn't a big deal, but he couldn't bring himself to say this to a woman like Yushu. "Save me, please?" Yushu looked at the criminal begging on the ground and thought for a while. Then she said to the steward, "I want to buy her. You name a price." The steward looked embarrassed. "Darren, this sinner has not been disciplined. According to our rules, it is not good to sell her. If you take her back and something happens to her, we can't bear the responsibility." That was what he said, but in fact, when this female prisoner was sent here, the higher-ups had specifically told him to train her well. Obviously, someone had booked her. How could he dare to sell such a high-class goods to Yushu on his own? Yushu didn't know what was going on, but she could see that the steward couldn't make the decision, so she said, "It doesn't matter. I won't blame you if something happens. Speaking of which, this female convict has some history with me. I'm determined to have her. If you can't be the steward, you might as well ask the master." Then she turned to Zhao Hui and said, "Mother, take her back to the house first. I will stay for a while." Although Zhao Hui was puzzled, she did not ask much. She nodded and left first. The steward had no choice but to invite Yushu to the living room to wait. He sent the female prisoner over and then left in a hurry to report to the higher-ups. Yushu sat on a chair and looked at the female prisoner, who was kneeling on the ground with her hands and feet tied. She bent down and called her, "Abe, Kue." Chapter 629. Yushu brought in Baekue out of the enclave and did not take out a single silver coin. Instead, she received an invitation from the owner of the enclave, letting her know who the backer of the enclave was. The name of the invitation was Lu Jiong, Prince Xiang's heir. That was to say, the enclave was the property of Prince Xiang's residence. Lu Jiong asked someone to send the invitation to Yushu without saying anything else. He did not mention anything about meeting her, a popular person, and acted as if he was doing her a favor. He was so solicitous for no reason, but Yushu could not figure out what he meant. She could only take him away first and mention it to Shuirue later. It was not until they sat in the carriage that Baekue believed that Yushu really wanted to take her away. Regardless of the narrowness of the carriage, she knelt at her feet and kept repeating the word, "Thank you." If it was not for Yushu sensing something was wrong and quickly pulled her up, this Donging girl would have kissed her shoes. Yushu pressed her to her side and roughly examined her body. She found many traces of torture. It was no wonder that she was humiliated in the enclave after coming out from prison and was scared out of her wits, wanting to escape. And Baekue was pulled around by Yushu and did not resist at all. She obediently knelt at her feet until Yushu pulled a cloak over her head, covering her naked body. Feeling warm, she could not help hugging her shoulders, trembling and sobbing softly. Yushu could not hear the sound of people crying, but seeing that she was really pitiful, she could not open her mouth to make her shut up. She could only pat her head like she was stroking a puppy and said, "Do you understand the official language?" And Baekue stopped crying and nodded her head hard, "Hai." After saying that, she found that it was not right and quickly changed her words, "I understand." Yushu made an sound, patting her head from time to time as her mind wandered. She didn't know why she would take this child in. Rather than saying that she suddenly became kind, it would be better to say that it was a spur-of-the-moment action. If she really brought him out, she would owe Xiang Prince Fu a favor and it would be too late for regrets. "Alright, I'll just treat it as doing a good deed every day." Her hand paused on the top of her head, and she tried to tell her as succinctly as possible, The envoy from Dong-ing committed the crime of deceiving the emperor. You are a criminal and you were supposed to be locked up in that place just now to suffer, but I bought you out. From now on you are my slave. Your life is mine. I can keep you, but you have to listen to me. Otherwise I'll send you back. Do you understand? The head under his hand shrank for a moment, then he replied, Kuei-zi understands. Yu Shu was satisfied with her tactfulness. He didn't try to scare her anymore. Returning to the mansion on Baochang Street, Yu Shu brought in Beikuei to her courtyard and called Yun Do over. She handed the person over to her to clean up before going to Zhao Hui to ask for some ointment for her. Xiner and Lin had just arrived. They were eager to show off in front of Yu Shu. Without her instructions, one fetched water and handed her a handkerchief. The other brewed tea and fanned herself, then helped Yu Shu change her clothes and shoes. When she sat on the couch, they knelt on the footstool and massaged her shoulders and legs. Yu Shu felt very comfortable being served, and she wanted to take a nap. She closed her eyes and actually fell asleep. This sleep lasted until the evening. It was Yun Do who came in to wake her up. Yu Shu sat cross-legged. Just as she stretched, Lin tactfully added a cushion on her back. When Yun Do saw the actions of the two newcomers, she felt depressed. It was originally her business, but now it was taken over by others. Looking at the girl enjoying it, how could she be happy? No, she had to work harder. She couldn't let the newcomers be inferior to her. Miss, that person has been washed and the ointment has been applied. Do you want me to bring her over for you to take a look? Bring her over. Under Yu Shu's command, Kuei was brought before her in a short while. The Japanese girl who had changed into a maid's dress was not as exquisite as the one she had seen at the Landwater conference. However, her fair skin and light eye color still made her stand out from ordinary people. Master. Once Kuei entered the room, she knelt down with both knees on the ground. Her hands were pressed against the side of her face, and the tip of her nose was touching the ground. She knelt without any hesitation to show her respect. The maids in the room looked at each other in dismay when they saw such a great gesture. Yu Shu waved her hand and asked them to leave. She then called Kuei to stand up and ask her questions. You're called Kuei. Is that your real name? Master, my real name is Kuei-zi. Abe is a fake surname they gave me. She said with a face full of shame, I'm a lowly commoner and don't deserve to have a surname. Lowly commoner? Yu Shu asked suspiciously, then who taught you to speak Chinese? I see that you speak it more fluently than that envoy called Yamada Jiro. It was my mother who taught me. She used to be a prostitute and was very smart. She learned Chinese from a benefactor. When I was young, she always told me about the De and dynasty. She even taught me how to write calligraphy. Speaking of her mother who was a prostitute, Kuei did not feel ashamed of her inferiority. Instead, she revealed a sorrowful expression. After listening to her background, Yu Shu suddenly suspected how she had followed the Japanese envoy to De and to kidnap people. Was it because her eyes looked demonic and made it easier to bluff people? Yu Shu recalled the first time she met this child. Her hair stood on end when she was stared at by her eyes. That was why she paid attention and did today's good deed. What's wrong with your eyes? Was it hereditary or a disease? After asking this question, Yu Shu saw fear appear on Kuei's face. She suddenly lowered her head and curled her body into a ball. It was as if she wanted to disappear in front of Yu Shu. What's wrong with you? Yu Shu was puzzled by her reaction. I beg Master to let me stay. Don't send me back. I beg you. Kuei suddenly kowtowed to Yu Shu with her head on the ground. Yu Shu was startled by her actions. Then she straightened her face and scolded, What are you doing? Shut up and get up. Kuei was obedient. She shivered and held back her crying. She obediently got up and buried her head in her chest. She did not dare to look up at Yu Shu. Whatever I ask you, you answer it. Don't cry. Do you hear me? I asked you what's wrong with your eyes. Why are you crying? Kuei-zi is an inauspicious person. The more Yu Shu listened, the more confused she became. What do you mean by an inauspicious person? My eyes can see the souls of the dead. And Biki's voice was almost inaudible as he sobbed. Yu Shu was startled. In young eyes? Kuei didn't see Yu Shu speak. She was very nervous and whispered, Ever since I could remember, I found that I was different from others. When I was young, I lived with my mother in a brothel. One winter was very cold, and a cat raised by Auntie Kizi froze to death. She fell into a memory. The tabby cat had golden fur and liked to lie in the sun and play with its tail. Later, Auntie Kizi found it frozen to death in the corridor. It was covered with dirty black mud and was as stiff as a stone. They buried its body at the bottom of the tree. At night, she saw a ball of light coming out of the mud, floating there and lingering. It was not until the 7th day that the light disappeared. Later she told this to her mother. Her mother didn't believe her and laughed and said that her eyes were dazzled. Later, someone died in the brothel and she saw the same thing on the dead body. When she told her mother, she couldn't laugh anymore. So her mother made a promise with her that she couldn't tell this secret to others. She promised, but she couldn't keep this promise. Slowly, more and more people knew her secret. People looked at her with disgust and fear. They said that she could see the ghosts of the dead. They said that she was an inauspicious person. A year ago, she and her mother were brought to Kyoto by an official. She was presented to the great General Ashikaga. Since then, she had to face different corpses every day. Sometimes she even slept in a pile of corpses. Finally, she followed the diplomatic group and came to Don. She told her story in halting bursts, and there was a moment of silence in the room. If it was anyone else who heard of such a strange thing, they would probably find it hard to believe, but Yushu was not an ordinary person. She herself had experienced something even more bizarre than this. She could transmigrate from 500 years ago, so why couldn't others see ghosts? Moreover, Nbiki had no reason to lie to her. There was no benefit in lying to her. Tell me more clearly. You can see the light emitted from the dead. Are you their ghosts? What do the ghosts look like? Can they see you? Yushu's interest was completely aroused. Nbiki was originally prepared to be despised by her. When he heard this, he quietly raised his head. But when he saw that there was no fear on her face, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. He told her timidly, when a person dies, the soul will leave the body. They will stay around the corpse and only dissipate after 7 days. Ghosts don't have a shape. They are just a mass of light. They can't speak and they won't run around. Only their colors are different. Yushu thought for a moment and asked, then at the Land and Water Conference, how did you know the name of the condemned person and what crime he had committed? The trick of letting the dead come back to life was exposed by Zhu Qingjue because of the knockout drug, but Nbiki accurately told the identity of the deceased, which became a mystery. That's because, Nbiki stuttered, half a year ago I discovered that not only could I see the ghosts of the dead, but I could also see the souls of people who were about to die. The day before the Land and Water Conference, Lord Yamada bribed your officials and brought me around the prison. He let me see some condemned people and asked about all the prisoners whose souls I could see. That's how I knew who the prisoner was. Yushu suddenly understood, and then she was surprised. Nbiki could see the ghosts of the dead. To put it bluntly, it was useless. But she could see the signs of the souls of people who were about to die. That was the key. Her heartbeat sped up. She sat up from the couch and paced around the room barefoot without wearing shoes. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind. She suddenly stopped and turned her head, staring at the trembling Nbiki. The corners of her mouth slowly opened, and she almost jumped in excitement. Chapter 630. In the future, the number of daily updates might decrease or even stop updating. I hope everyone can understand. Chapter 631. On the last day of the month, the August book of the Great Land finally reached Empress Rui Shi's hands. The days of betting for the Feipin in the Hogong had been determined by Kunling Bureau, but the actual execution still had to go through the Empress who controlled the 6 palaces and the Phoenix Seal. Rui Empress opened the book of the Great Land and read through it. She didn't find any problems. After thinking it over, she found the ingenuity. For example, Lu Fei had lost a day for nothing. For example, Xu Fei's 3 days weren't good days. Also, Sun Guirin, who was in favor, didn't seem to have lost a day, but had bumped into Xu Fei and Zhao Pin. Ha! Rui Empress snorted and handed the book of the Great Land to Zheng Shanggong. She took a sip of tea and said, "It looks like the Hogong is going to change. Someone has waited patiently for all these years and finally can't sit still anymore. They even want to interfere in Ben Gong's business." Zheng Shanggong was older than Rui Empress by a decade. She was an old servant of the previous emperor. It was said that she had saved the previous emperor when he was patrolling the north. After the ascension, she had been sent to Perching Wu Palace to guide the mistresses of the 6 palaces. In this palace where there were servants and masters, her position was special. Even the 4 Zhengfei had to amiably call her Zhenggugu when they saw her. Even Rui Empress could see the clues, much less the experienced Zheng Shanggong. I heard from Yongla Palace that not long ago, Yu Nuyu of Kunling Bureau was summoned into the palace. She first went to see Guifeng Yang and then saw Xu Fei and Hung Fei. This old servant had thought that this official wouldn't offend anyone. I didn't think she would be so daring. A newly appointed official dared to tamper with the book of the great land. Zheng Shanggong really wanted to praise her for her courage. Rui Empress furrowed her brow. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes revealed the traces of time. She had a disdainful expression and bit her lower lip. They all have sons and naturally have to plan well. But Ben Gong is spending so much effort for what? She married Emperor Zhao Qing when she was 16. At that time he was just an unremarkable prince. Who would have thought that after 3 years in the palace, although he was not conferred the title of king, he became the crown prince when the former emperor was in his old age. And in the crown prince's palace, several women with their own merits moved in. Xue Shi, who was younger and more beautiful than her, Yin Shi, who was richer than her, and Lu Shi, who was more gentle and considerate than her. The only thing she was stronger than them in was her identity as the crown princess. Emperor Zhao Qing loved beauties, and he was a passionate but unsentimental person. When she was young she didn't care about meat and vegetables. Her eldest son was the son of a bed-warming maid in the crown prince's residence. When she saw the child being born, it wasn't that she didn't hate him, but he was just 1 year old. That child would die the next day. His eldest son had died early. Because of this, Emperor Zhao Qing was depressed for a period of time. But very quickly he had a second son, the third prince, who was the third of his children. He was born to a concubine that he was very fond of. Not long after the child was born he became the crown prince, so he loved the third prince very much. He even asked for the title of concubine for his birth mother, Lu. But good times didn't last. The third prince didn't live to see the day he succeeded the throne before he died of illness. In these 2 years the inner courtyard of the crown prince's residence was no longer under her control. Emperor Zhao Qing had a few more children and she. 3 years after giving birth to the second princess, she became pregnant again. In those days she was extremely careful. She always felt that the women in the crown prince's mansion all had bad intentions towards her. They coveted her position and wanted to kill her and her child. Later she gave birth to the fifth prince's son and finally had a breather. It seemed that her position as the crown prince's imperial concubine was finally stabilized on the day her son was born. The former emperor bestowed the name of the crown prince's fifth son, Lu Su, symbolizing the beauty of the rising sun. Those women who didn't have children suddenly became insignificant in her eyes. Even Shui Liangdi, who Emperor Zhao Qing was infatuated with for a while and lingered for several months, didn't seem to be scary. Under her attentive expectations her Su-er grew up day by day. Emperor Zhao Qing finally sat on the dragon throne. Following the ancestral tradition of mourning for the former emperor for 3 years, he changed the name of the country, pardoned the people, and conferred titles to the 6 palaces. She smoothly became the empress, the motherly model of the country. But good times didn't last. When her Su-er was 4 years old, he drowned and died. She was extremely angry. Even when a young concubine provoked her in front of her, Emperor Zhao Qing's cold and heartless attitude couldn't compare to her anger at that time. She thoroughly investigated the 6 palaces and alerted the court. She wanted to find the murderer who murdered her son. Unexpectedly, in the end, she didn't find anything. It looked like the 5th prince had sneaked out to play and accidentally drowned. Other than that group of damned servants, there was no one else to blame. She went from anger to resentment. After all these years she still couldn't forget it. She coldly watched the women in the inner palace fight openly and covertly and guessed which slut had killed her son. However, it was as if her eyes were shrouded in a layer of gauze. Layer after layer was pushed away, making it impossible for her to see clearly. Xu Fei Yin Shi was the daughter of the minister of the left. Her ancestry could be traced back 300 years. She was a branch left behind by the founding elder, Duke Pei. It could be said that her family had a long history. Her birth meant that as long as the Yin family didn't fall, Emperor Zhao Qing would never lack a place for her in the inner palace. Yin Shi had been born beautiful and talented, but she wasn't good at business. Her personality was cold and rigid, and she always liked to make trouble for Emperor Zhao Qing. So even though her family was the best, she had never received Emperor Zhao Qing's favor. She couldn't compare to Xue Shi, and she couldn't even compare to the ordinary Lu Shi. But what made people envious was that she had given birth to a good son. The 7th prince, Lu Hao, was skilled in both literature and martial arts. He was righteous and easy to approach. Adding on that he was studious and hardworking, he was the type of son that all parents in the world hoped for. So Emperor Zhao Qing greatly favored this son and had endlessly rewarded him from a young age. When the 4th prince's birth was low, and the princes before him had all died by the heavens and didn't have a son, he naturally paid the most attention to Lu Hao. Empress Rui felt that the most suspicious person was Xu Fei. But with Xu Fei's personality, she didn't seem like a woman who was skilled enough to kill without leaving any traces. Then there was Shui noble consort. As the daughter of the right minister, she came from a prestigious family and had 3 generations of loyalty. She had been arrogant for a while in the crown prince's fu. This had to do with her father's prestige in the court, and the fact that her Tanhua older brother had been recognized by the previous emperor. But later bad news came out of the Shui family. First was old Madame Shui's death from illness, then that great young master Shui suddenly died on his way out of Jing. She had been in the fu for 3 years without any news. Because of this, Shui sure became well behaved. Until she entered the palace and gave birth to the 9th prince. Before she could be proud again, Emperor Zhao Qing gave her another blow. Using the excuse that his body was weak, he sent the young Lu Tan to Mount Longhu to recover. This trip lasted for more than a decade. It was so long that Empress Rui couldn't help but feel sympathy for Shui noble consort. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, the 9th prince would be summoned back to Jing and shock the world at the Double Yang gathering? Even the 7th prince, who was older than him, had suffered a loss at his hands. Shui sure was a person with the position of Guifei on her head, but she was able to endure for so many years under all the rumors and be mocked behind her back. This kind of shrewdness to be able to unknowingly kill her there was nothing wrong with it. But the problem was, when the 5th prince had his accident, Shui noble consort had just been diagnosed to be pregnant. Rui Empress had given birth to more than one child and knew the perseverance of a mother. When she was pregnant, her only thought was to protect the child. Even if it was for the sake of the child in her womb, she wouldn't allow any danger to appear by her side. Where would she have the extra thoughts to harm others? Nyang Yang, your body hasn't been well recently. It is best not to think too much. Jing Shanggong saw Rui Empress's thoughtful expression and guessed that she was thinking about the incident of the 5th prince's death. As he advised in a warm voice, he put the book of Kuan into his sleeve, saying, Nyang Yang doesn't have to worry about Sun Guren. Maybe you will hear good news this month. As to the Imperial Lady of Kuanling Bureau, since the Holy One gave her a title, it is to honor this person. Rather than going against her, why don't we invite her in to form a good relationship and see what kind of person she is? What can Zhongcui Palace give her? We don't lack for her. Chapter 632. Yushu had rested for 2 days because of moving. As soon as she returned to the Celestial Commissioner, she received the Empress's order. She was not surprised at all. She packed up, gave a few words to Wen Xiao, and then went with the people sent by the palace. The Phoenix Perching Palace wasn't as cold and cheerless as Yushu had imagined it to be. Golden-colored glass, colorful paintings, exquisite sky flowers, and green potted plants filled the corridors. In this early autumn season, there wasn't the slightest bit of desolation. The eunuch led her into the palace door, and a palace maid came forward to guide her all the way to the side hall facing the sun. In other palaces, other than the palace master who lived in the main hall, the left and right side halls were mostly occupied by low-level concubines. Only Shiwu Palace was occupied by the empress alone. This was the privilege of the empress. She knew that this empress was not favored. She had sat on the empress throne for many years, but she had no children. She gave birth to 4 children for Emperor Zhao Qing. The 2nd princess married the Tao Wenguan Grand Scholar, the 5th prince died at a young age, and the 10th princess died a violent death. Now there was only a 9-year-old 14th princess by her side. The process of meeting the empress was much more complicated than when Yushu visited noble consort Shui. She first changed clothes in the incense room in the side hall, and only had a thin shirt left. Her hair was almost scattered and she had to comb it again. She had a special palace maid check her belongings and register them one by one to make sure there was nothing she shouldn't bring. Then she rinsed her mouth and lit a stick of incense in front of her. She sat quietly for a while and waited for an experienced old mammy to speak. Then she put on her clothes and went out. Yushu had already looked through the books in the Celestial Commissioner. This set of rules for meeting the Empress was passed down from the time of Emperor Anwu. In other words, it was made by Empress Ningxin when she was alive. Thinking about it carefully, it was not difficult to understand. Empress Ningxin was not only the mother of the country, but also the chief officer of the Celestial Commissioner. To say it disrespectfully, a large part of it restricted the behavior of the emperor. At the beginning of the founding of Da'en, the customs and culture of the previous dynasty influenced the generation. Women's status was not as good as men. Many people thought that women should not interfere in court politics. There were many officials who attacked Empress Ningxin. By establishing such a rule, a lot of trouble was avoided. For example, this stick of incense in front of him had a purpose. It was called Three Thoughts Fragrance. It was said that in the past, there was a minister's wife who had some friendship with Empress Ningxin, because her husband and son were convicted. She entered the palace to plead for mercy. With the determination to die, she smeared poison on the hairpin. Originally, she thought that if Empress Ningxin did not agree to her request, she would commit suicide in front of her. Empress Ningxin had heard the news early and did not refuse to see her, but after she entered the palace, he had someone lead her into a room and burned a stick of incense in front of her. He told her to sit motionless until the incense was extinguished. Only then was he willing to see her. In the end, the minister's wife calmed down while waiting. When the incense was finished, she gave up on the crazy idea. In the end, she didn't do anything stupid. This was how the incense got its name. This was a psychological tactic, but it was used in the rules of the palace. Yushu flipped through this piece of unofficial history in the collection of Taisher Library. She had to admire Empress Ningxin's wisdom. Of course, Yushu didn't have any bad ideas. She leaned against the back of the chair and closed her eyes to rest. She didn't care about the old nanny who was staring at her. There were a few palace maids standing in the room. They quietly raised their eyes to look at this legendary messenger Miao Ling and secretly thought that she was really extraordinary. Those who came to Phoenix Perching Palace for the first time to visit the concubine were all trembling with fear and trepidation. However, this one in front of them was very relaxed and didn't even have a drop of sweat. Seeing that her eyes were closed, they wondered if she had fallen asleep. After half an hour, Yushu finally saw the current empress, Lady Rue, in the side hall. As a former commoner, seeing the noblest woman in the world, Yushu didn't feel particularly excited. Empress Rue's body was slender and thin. At first glance, she looked extremely weak. She was wearing a beautiful gold and lawn robe, her long silk tail hanging on her feet. Large gold pearls and bright jade hung from her heavy bun. She wasn't as beautiful as Lady Shui, wasn't as arrogant as Lady Yin, and wasn't as amiable as Lady Lu. There was a faint smile on her face. When she spoke to Yushu, it seemed intimate, but there was an indescribable indifference. This subject greets the Empress. Long live the Empress. Yushu knelt down. After kowtowing, she heard Empress Rue speak. No need for formalities, grant a seat. Two palace maids carried over a chair. It wasn't a stool or a block, but a chair with a backrest. Yushu glanced at the chair and instantly understood. The Empress had summoned her into the palace, not to make trouble for her regarding the Kuan book, but to express goodwill. Thank you, Nyang Yang, for your grace. Yushu sat down on the chair. She raised her head and looked at Empress Rue. She didn't behave like those female officials in the books and the chambermaids. The old mama on the side saw that she was so unruly and frowned. She was about to scold her when she was stopped by a look from He Shanggong, who was standing behind Empress Rue. Ha ha! Empress Rue laughed and said to Yushu, I heard that envoy Miao Ling was originally from the south? Yushu replied, yes, this subject is for me, Yang. Yang? Ben Gong has never been to the south. What are the customs of your hometown? Tell me about some interesting ones? Even though Empress Rue appeared to be approachable, her words couldn't help but contain a sense of superiority. Yushu knew that she was trying to find a topic to warm up and cooperated by talking about some of the things in Yang City. Empress Rue was very interested and occasionally asked questions. In the end, when it came to food, she had the servants present 3 colored pastries. She said that the imperial chef had just made the pastries from the south this morning for Yushu to try. After drinking tea and eating pastries, Empress Rue felt that it was time to warm up the atmosphere and went to the main topic. Kuan Ling Bureau presented the Kuan book for the 8th month. Ben Gong has seen it. Did the envoy make it? Yushu wiped her hands with a handkerchief and answered seriously, it was after this subject made a divination, and the right Commander Darren made the final decision. If Empress Rue couldn't see what was hidden in the Kuan book, she wouldn't be able to sit peacefully in her position. Yushu knew that she would ask, so she laid an ambush in her words. It sounded like Jing Chen's final decision wasn't bad, but who knew that the entire thing had been arranged by her alone? Jing Chen hadn't changed anything, stamped it and submitted it to the palace. Pausing, a thread of unease appeared on her face. She asked, this subject is frightened. Is there anything wrong with this month's Kuan book? Empress Rue saw her unease and her voice softened slightly. She said, there's nothing wrong. But Ben Gong is in charge of the Feipin of the 6 palaces. There are some things that Ben Gong has to say to the envoy. Ben Gong's body had been unwell before and was only able to see you today. I heard that you have already met with the Nyang of the other palaces. They must have already explained some matters to you. There is only one point that Ben Gong has to mention again. Yu Shu stood and bowed, asking, "Please tell me, Nyang." Chapter 633. Yu Shu knew in her heart that the Book of Earth in the 8th month would definitely be against Empress Rui's wishes. Before entering the palace, she had speculated what countermeasures Empress Rui would have. Would it be like Xu Fei to intimidate her, or would it be like Lu Fei to move her with emotion and lure her, or would it be like Shui Gui Fei to not hide anything and clearly wanted to win her over? She hadn't thought that Empress Rui didn't threaten or entice her. Instead, she started to talk to her about great principles. His Majesty has a myriad of affairs to attend to every day. During the day, he has to meet with the civil and military officials and review memorials from all over the country. Only at night will he be free. Only when he returns to the inner palace can he take a short rest. If he is exhausted and meets some insensible and unlikable palace girls, wouldn't that be troublesome? The female envoy should know that the creation of the Book of Earth was a rule passed down from the time of Emperor Xingzu. The original reason was for the Emperor's dragon body's health. If she blindly followed the rules and disregarded His Majesty's likes and dislikes, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? His Majesty is the ruler, the female envoy is the subject. The subject cannot understand His Majesty's heart. How can I share the burden of the ruler? Rui Empress raised her voice in the last sentence. That slightly displeased expression was clearly questioning Yu Shu. But she didn't directly blame Yu Shu for tricking her in the Book of Earth in the 8th month. It wasn't that she didn't follow the rules, but that she was too well behaved and didn't care about the Emperor's feelings, so she lost her role as an official. Hearing this, Yu Shu couldn't just sit there foolishly. She lowered her head and left the chair that she had just warmed up. Your Highness is right. This subject was negligent. Yu Shu's mind was very clear. She couldn't challenge the Empress directly, so she could only say yes. Rui Empress saw her submit and her expression softened. Her voice became gentle again. It is good that the female envoy understands reason. Ben Gong isn't purposefully making things difficult for you. Considering that you are a new official, it is inevitable that you will make mistakes. In the future you should be more flexible. Being rigid isn't a good thing. Just take the Kunling Bureau's Kun book this month as an example. There are some arrangements that aren't suitable. Speaking of this, Yu Shu certainly had to ask the Empress to point out which parts were inappropriate. Rui Empress raised her hand and He Gong, who was standing at the side, handed over the Kun book that had been copied in August. She flipped through it and said, "The newly promoted Sun Guirin in the palace is one with good fortune. His Majesty also likes her. Ben Gong saw that you arranged for 3 days. You are treated more generously than other people. This is not bad. But there is a problem with the day you chose. One day she is behind Xu Fei, the other day she is behind Zhao Pin. You probably don't know, but these two are both noble. As the day nears, it's hard to avoid jealousy and causing a headache for the Emperor." Yu Shu thought that Rui Empress would keep her in suspense, but she clearly sided with that Sun Guirin. Her words were simply telling her, Sun Guirin is protected by Ben Gong, don't make things difficult for her. This subject will remember. As Yu Shu acknowledged, she thought back to the situation that day at Zhongcui Palace. Shui Guifei had hinted to her that Rui Empress didn't have a son and there weren't any young imperial sons in the palace that could be adopted. So she had the idea of using someone else's womb to have a child. She trained Sun Guirin, the little palace maid, and sent her in front of Emperor Zhao Qin. Once Sun Guirin became pregnant, Rui Empress had ways to make her fall out of favor. When she gave birth to a son, the son would naturally be adopted under her name. As it concerned the future throne, Rui sure would have the power to fight. Looking at Rui Empress's actions now, it was true. Rui Empress was slightly surprised at Yu Shu's tactfulness. She had heard many of this Miao Ling's glorious deeds before. Most of them were against etiquette and shocking to the world. She had originally thought that she was a proud and rebellious woman. She hadn't thought that she would respond with one sentence. She had no way to use the soft knife that she had prepared. After thinking for a while, Rui Empress gave a few more instructions to Yu Shu. There really wasn't much to say, so she let her go. In the end, she called He Gong to see her out. Walking in the corridor outside the side hall, He Gong chatted a bit with Yu Shu with an amiable expression. Female envoy is young and promising. Do you have any brothers in your family? I have a younger brother. Yu Shu had heard long ago from Shui Guifei that Rui Empress had an old Shanggong by her side. He had a lot of face. It must be this one. Oh, is he at the age to go to school? My younger brother is 13. Which teacher did he take as his teacher? Yu Shu shook her head. He was sent to a school in the capital to learn how to read. He Shanggong paused in his steps and turned his head to say, "Forgive this old servant for speaking bluntly. I've heard of official Yu's past. Your father was a proper scholar but died early. If he has a son, why doesn't he inherit his father's legacy? The young masters of Enling City, while they all go to school, all of them have a famous teacher. If young Master Yu is a scholar, he will naturally be taught by Darren. But if he is a scholar at this age, he should find a famous teacher. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of his future?" Yu Shu had a thoughtful expression. She really hadn't thought about finding a virtuous and respectable teacher for Yu Xiaoxiu to discipline him. It wasn't that she didn't care about Yu Xiaoxiu's future. At the beginning, she had planned to pass on the time of calamity to her younger brother, so she didn't have the intention of having Yu Xiaoxiu study the 4 books and 5 classics to sit for the imperial examinations. Then, when Yu Xiaoxiu chose to follow He Fangji to study medicine, she gave up even more. He Shanggong looked at her expression and added, "I won't hide it from official Yu." The words just now were what Nyang Yang had told this old servant to ask. If official Yu is interested, Nyang Yang has a recommendation. Great scholar Chiu of the Taoan school. He has the writings of Hanlin Zi and is virtuous. His Majesty has praised him several times as an example of a scholar. Many scholars in the capital have come to pay their respects and hope to receive a few pointers. If young master you can take him as a teacher, it would be the best. Yu Shu understood. Just now in the side hall she had lowered her head to be a teacher. But Empress Rui wasn't one to make empty promises. This was the benefit promised to her. She had heard Shui Rui mention great scholar Chiu before. He really was a virtuous and respectable scholar. It wasn't that she was belittling herself, but with Yu Xiaoxiu's family, background and age, he wasn't even good enough to be a scholar boy, much less a disciple. But once Empress Rui opened her mouth, the impossible became a sure thing. The second princess was the Empress Di daughter and was married to great scholar Chiu's eldest son, Chiu Hengji. With this layer of relationship, it was no wonder Empress Rui dared to promise her. Yu Shu only had this one younger brother. Naturally, she wanted to give him the best environment and education. Empress Rui had grasped this point well. If it was anyone else, it would be hard not to be moved. It was a pity, she smiled inside, but her expression was cautious. He Shanggong, who was waiting for her to answer, said, "This? Let me go back and think about it." He Shanggong glanced at her, nodded and didn't say anything else. After sending him out of the palace gates, she turned back. Empress Rui was still in the side hall and hadn't moved. Seeing her return, she asked, "How was it? What did she say?" He Shanggong replied, "She said she needed to think about it." Empress Rui was surprised again. Just now she had thought that Yu Shu was tactful. How come she didn't know what was good for her? To be able to become Chiu Luanshi's inner disciple. Other people couldn't even pray for it and this person was so picky? Based on what you think, what is going on with this person? Empress Rui hesitated. Today's matter had gone smoothly, but why did she feel it wasn't right? Even He Shanggong, a shrewd person, couldn't tell if Yu Shu was good or bad. He thought for a while before speaking. She doesn't look like a short-sighted person. I can't find any mistakes. Maybe she has ulterior motives and is just pretending to be courteous with you. He Shanggong hesitantly brought up a matter. At the Hibiscus Gentlemen's Banquet in June, Miss Zizhu and Yu Darren were at odds. Miss Zizhu was incited by Shi Wenjunju and stirred up trouble with this Yu Darren. Duchess Jing almost threw her out. Adding on the rumors, Yu Darren is someone who hates evil. It's possible that he doesn't have a knot in his heart. The corner of Empress Rui's mouth curled up. She sneered, "She dares to go against Ben Gong? Lend her 10 guts." Chapter 634. Yu Shu came out of Perching Wu Palace. The little eunuch led the way. She followed behind with her hands behind her back, thinking about the instructions she had just received from Empress Rui. She was in Kunling Bureau and was a female official. She had to interact with the consorts in the Hogong. She couldn't just stay out of it, she couldn't curry favor from all sides, so she had to choose a good teammate. Of the 4 heavyweights of the Hogong, Consort Lu Xian had been implicated in the imperial envoy's headless case and had lost. Lu Yi, that boy, had no hope of inheriting the throne. Xu Fei didn't need to be said. Her Lao Qi Ning Wang was a good son, but Yushu had been ambushed by him multiple times. He was an enemy and not a friend. In the future, it could be a life and death situation. The possibility of turning an enemy into a friend was almost zero. As for Empress Rue, even though she was the mother of the world, she pitifully had no children. Seeing that Emperor Zhaoqing was getting old, she was forced to think of using someone else's womb to have a child. Even more, that Sun Gui might not even be able to have a son. It was very risky to stand with her. As for Imperial Consort Shui, she had the support of her maternal family, the Shui family. Lu Tan was a good boy, unlike Lu Yi, who was a pile of mud that couldn't be helped. Most importantly, there was the unspeakable relationship between Yushu and Shui Rue. All in all, there was the possibility of being on the same side as Imperial Consort Shui. So Empress Rue's speech to her in Perching Wu Palace was a waste of words. Yushu thought it over again and felt that it was best to be on the same side as Imperial Consort Shui. Once she stepped out of the palace gates, she threw Empress Rue's instructions to the back of her mind. She wasn't afraid of threats, she didn't care for rewards. Since Empress Rue hadn't taken advantage of her, why should she listen to her orders? The consorts with status in the Hogong learned that Yushu had been summoned into the palace by Empress Rue on the same day. When Xu Fei heard the news, she immediately sneered. She hadn't seen the Book of Great Earth in August. Seeing the Empress' actions, she must be unhappy. Feng Shui changed with time. Could it be Xue Shi who could influence the intentions of the Kunling Bureau? She didn't like to join in on the commotion. She just wanted to watch as the two of Perching Phoenix Palace and Zhong Chui Palace fought. Consort Lu listened to her trusted palace maid and said worriedly, "I don't know what the arrangements are for this month. Even the Empress has been alerted. Could it be that official Yu accepted the Empress's bribe and didn't do a good job?" Concubine Lu, on the other hand, was able to keep her composure. She rested her embroidery on her knees, and the needle and thread in her hands did not tremble at all. She raised her head and said, "What's the hurry? Didn't my family's little grand-aunt enter the palace a few days ago to have her fortune told?" Compared to the other palaces, the atmosphere at noble consort Shui's side was obviously much better. Early in the morning on the second day of the new year, Zhong Chui Palace had received the green token from the Bureau of Palace Affairs. It was noble consort Shui's turn to serve the emperor tonight. As soon as Yushu stepped into Phoenix Perching Palace, a spy reported to Zhong Chui Palace. Noble consort Shui was standing in front of a large bronze mirror with the head of a beast. She was trying on the newly tailored clothes for this season. Two palace maids knelt by her feet and tidied up the hem. When she heard the report, she smiled at the figure in the mirror with a rosy face and waved her hand to dismiss them. Granny Tao was slightly worried. How can Miss Yu remain unmoved if the Empress intervenes? Why don't we send someone to wait in front of the passageway? Later we'll intercept her and Master can give her a few words. That's unnecessary. Noble consort Shui turned around and said, "Anything that is tempting must have the power to incite people. It's nothing more than fame and fortune, love and hatred. This Yushu is currently at a time when she has both fame and fortune. She doesn't lack anything, so it's not good for her to be threatened or tempted. Nanny, why do you think she would be used by us?" Granny Tao lowered her head and thought for a while, but couldn't say anything. "Aha, since it's not hatred, then it's friendship. Dalong has a good relationship with her and the two of them claim to be siblings. When she was poor he helped her a lot. She's not an ungrateful person. People have close and distant relationships. Now that she wants to talk about friendship with us, if we try to take advantage of her weakness and use some kind of carrot and stick tactic, wouldn't that make things worse?" Noble consort Shui was very clear about why Yushu would stand on her side and help her do things. Granny Tao revealed a look of shame. As expected, "Your Highness is good at reading people and has thought things through." She hesitated again and then asked curiously, "What was in the pouch that Your Highness gave Miss Yu the last time she entered the palace?" Only she would dare to ask about it in detail. Noble consort Shui stroked the corner of her lips and lightly smiled. "Ah, it's just a small gift." It was a small pouch that couldn't hold many pieces of gold and silver. It was just a piece of paper with a few birthdays written on it. It had been half a month since Yushu moved to Baochang Street. Her family had settled down, so she was ready to bring Aunt Chui over. Aunt Chui had already separated herself from the Ji family, so there was no need for her to hide anymore. Yushu took a horse carriage and went to the east side of the city with Yu Xiaoxiu to bring her back. Speaking of which, after Aunt Chui and Yushu opened their hearts that day, she had more or less figured out some things. After waiting for a long time, Yushu finally came to pick her up. There wasn't much to pack, so she had her maidservant take 2 bags and left with Yushu. The horse carriage went through the main gate. Although Yushu didn't want to take Aunt Chui back with great fanfare, there were people watching her all day outside. If people found out that she didn't go through the main gate after taking her mother, they would criticize her again. Aunt Chui got off the carriage and looked at the large courtyard. It was even more luxurious than the one in front of the Ji family's ancestral home. She was immediately stunned. For the past 2 months she had been confined to the small courtyard by Yushu and didn't go out at all. Thus, she had never heard of Yushu's reputation and thought that Yushu was just a female disguise master who had passed the exams. She didn't know that Yushu had become an official in the imperial court and had even received a title from the emperor. After entering the main gate, there was a row of neat and tidy maidservants and manservants. 2 rows of people stood on the flat stone-paved path and bowed to greet her. "Welcome Furin back to the Fu. May Furin have good luck and good luck." Aunt Chui's legs turned to jelly. Even when she was helped into the hall and sat on a completely new armchair with a soft mat under her butt and fragrant tea in front of her, she still couldn't come back to her senses. Yushu glanced at the crowd of servants outside and frowned. This lineup wasn't arranged by her in advance. She didn't know whose idea it was. Sun ah. Aunt Chui took a long time to say these 2 words. She grabbed Yu Xiaoxiu's hand and stuttered, Is this our home? Those people outside, are they all our servants? I heard them call me husband and Furin just now. Don't tell me I'm dreaming. Quickly pinch me and see if it hurts." When Aunt Chui was young, her dream was to be the wife of the second master of the Yin family's concubine. Later on, she got married to Yu Xiaoxiu's father and became a pitiful scholar's wife. When Yu Xiaoxiu's father died, she was chosen by Ji Laosan. He didn't mind that she was a widow and brought her back to be a concubine. From beginning to end, she never dreamed of becoming a proper wife one day. She didn't expect that after so many twists and turns she would be blessed by her children. She sat in the main seat of the hall and was respectfully called Furin. Yu Xiaoxiu, on the other hand, had a mother-son relationship with concubine Chui. Seeing that she was in a trance, he didn't dare to pinch her. He quickly turned his head to Yushu and gave her a pleading look. Yushu coughed and gave Yundo and Lin a look to leave. She closed the door and dispersed the group of people outside. She sat down on the other side of Aunt Chui, pulled the back of her hand and patted it lightly. "Mother, what's wrong with you? I already said that I would bring you here to enjoy life. This residence is our family's, so you can rest assured and stay here. Daughter now has an official position. From now on, you are the proper Furinyu. Mother Xiaoxiu and I are no longer someone's concubine and have no relationship with the Ji family." Aunt Chui blinked a few times and asked hesitantly, "What official position? What are you talking about?" Yu Xiaoxiu interrupted and said, "Mother, older sister has become a high-ranking official of the Celestial Commissioner. She is now a female official. You haven't seen older sister in her official robes and black veil. She looks so majestic." Hearing this, Mistress Chui reacted after a long while. She couldn't hold it in for a moment, and with a sob, she raised her head and actually cried on the spot. "My God, you're finally willing to open your eyes. You've made me suffer for most of my life. I've been a slave and a maid, and I've even married a short-lived ghost. I've been betrothed to a heartless man. You evil heavens, you heartless person. Your Yu family's ancestors must have accumulated good karma in their previous lives to have a wife like me. Not only did I continue your family's lineage, but I also raised a good daughter." Whoa. Yushu almost laughed when she heard concubine Chui's tearful voice. However, she could also tell that concubine Chui had thought it through and didn't intend to go against her anymore. Zhao Hui knew that Yushu was going to pick up Aunt Chui today, so she prepared a welcoming banquet in advance. She wanted to leave a place for the mother and children to talk, so she didn't go to the front to welcome them. Hearing that they entered the gate, she led the 2 maidservants to the East Stride courtyard. Yushu arranged a small courtyard for Aunt Chui. She assigned maids to clean, and the bed and quilt were newly changed yesterday. As soon as Zhao Hui entered the courtyard, she heard voices coming from the main room. A woman spoke with a southern accent. Before she reached the door, she saw a thin woman walk out in small steps. She stood in the corridor in a hurry and looked around. Yushu and Xiaoxiu followed behind her. Zhao Hui glanced at her roughly. She saw her arched eyebrows and almond-shaped eyes. Her face was somewhat similar to Yushu's. She knew that this was the mother of the siblings. She was 1 or 2 years older than Zhao Hui, so she walked forward to greet her with a smile. Aunt Chui didn't know Zhao Hui, but she knew that this pair of children had recognized a foster family. On the way here, Yushu told her something again. It was nothing more than telling her not to be petty. The 2 families were a family and they could live in harmony in the future. Aunt Chui didn't want her children to find other parents and show filial piety for no reason. However, she didn't care about Yushu's affairs. Now that her daughter had entered this big house and became an official, she felt like she was dreaming. She didn't want to find fault, so she just responded to Zhao Hui with a smile. The two women struck up a conversation. "You praise my daughter's good looks, I thank you for taking care of the children for me." Sister and sister immediately called each other, not at all distant, which surprised Yushu. In the afternoon, He Fangji didn't come back from the clinic. Aunt Chui followed Zhao Hui to see old Madame He. The family of women and children sat around the table and had a banquet. Aunt Chui drank a few cups and got drunk. She pulled Zhao Hui and cried, telling her how hard it was for her to raise the two children. Although Zhao Hui knew that this woman didn't treat the two children well, and especially didn't care about her daughter, Yushu, she couldn't help feeling sympathetic when she saw her complain. Her previous prejudice against Aunt Chui also faded a lot. Chapter 635. In just half a month, the luxurious residents on Baochang Street had purchased dozens of people. From the ones who swept the floor in front of the door to the ones who guarded the door, not a single one of them wasn't a sinner that Yushu had carefully selected from the supply house. In total, she had spent nearly 1,000 taels of silver. Even those wealthy officials, eunuchs, and gentry families weren't as extravagant as her, willing to waste money on a few slaves. Xan Lu heard that Yushu's big house had been tidied up. She didn't wait for Yushu to send someone to invite her. She felt a little puzzled from the moment she entered the door. The gatekeeper ran an errand and led her to the living room. Two maids came in to serve tea and cold dishes and then quietly left. When the servant from the front yard ran to the backyard to invite Yushu over, she suddenly realized what was strange. The servants in the Lotus House were too well behaved. They did not have the shyness of a small family, nor did they have the timidity of a newly bought servant. They treated people and received guests in an orderly manner. It really made people mistakenly think that they had entered an old mansion. Xan Lu was surprised by Yushu, and then she knew why. "You mean that all the servants in your mansion were bought from the conferred courtyard, that black-hearted place?" Xan Lu was surprised. "How much money did you spend?" For a family like the Xan family, every year they had to replace the servants, buy new ones and sweep away the old ones. It was always the housemaid who brought people to the mansion to choose for them. They never went to the conferred courtyard to be slaughtered. It was only when her younger brother added a page boy last year that he made a special trip to the conferred courtyard. He spent the price of 4 or 5 pages to buy a boy who could read and write. Yushu calculated the total and roughly told her the number. "Who gave you this bad idea? You can't waste money like this, right? If you had told me earlier, I would have asked my mother to find you a few housemaids for officials. If you bought too many maids, they would have given you some rough ones." Xan Lu bitterly lectured Yushu. Every month, she could get money from her parents and grandfather, so she had her own little treasury. Seeing Yushu spending so much money, he was worried for her. It would be wrong to say that Yushu was wasteful. At the end of the day, it was because they had different ideas. Other families usually bought slaves to train them, but she was willing to buy slaves that had been trained well. This mentality was similar to the hiring of most modern companies. They were more willing to hire people with qualifications and experience than those who had just entered society. For the sake of efficiency, spending a little more money was worth nothing. What's more, she was not short of money at this time. Not counting the debt she won from the Chui family's big gambling house, she still had tens of thousands of taels of profit from the crystal business in Jubiozai. "That's not how the accounts are calculated," Yushu explained to Xan Lu. "I used to be a poor commoner. How would I know how to discipline my servants? Instead of buying an ignorant one to give me a headache, it's better to buy a ready-made one." Xan Lu thought that this was reasonable, so he did not complain about her anymore. He continued to ask about her housewarming banquet. "Grandfather asked me yesterday. Have you picked a good day?" Ever since the Water and Land Conference, Yushu had not appeared at Taisher Library. The invitation sent to her residence did not receive a reply. The Celestial Commissioner was not a place where people could be stationed. Many people wanted to see her, but there was no way to do so. Many people came to Xan Lu to ask about her. They were all waiting to see when she would open the door to the banquet. "I have chosen the day. It's on the 12th of this month. I'm just afraid that everyone will be too busy since it's close to the Mid-Autumn Festival. If I don't invite them and leave an empty banquet, it will be a joke." Hearing her words, Xan Lu rolled his eyes and said, "As long as you invite them, no one will dare to not give you face." Yushu laughed and did not mention it. She planned to put on a big show this time and put the housewarming banquet and the thank you banquet together. The Ministry of Rites had already stamped the golden seal. Emperor Zhaoqing wanted to use her title to make a fuss, so she should cooperate and publicize it. Next, Yushu proposed to bring Xanlu to see her large garden. Xanlu was dragged along by her, thinking that there was nothing much to see. It was nothing more than fake mountains and rivers, red flowers and green trees. However, after passing through a moon gate, there was only green mist in front of them. After a dozen steps, a plum blossom deer raised its horn and took small steps, stepping on the fallen flowers on the ground. It passed in front of them, glanced at them and continued to stroll, not the least bit afraid of strangers. Xanlu widened her eyes and walked forward. She saw monkeys squatting on the mountain wall, big-tailed squirrels shuttling between the branches, and a row of exquisite bird cages hanging at the bottom of the corridor. Inside were thrushes, skylarks and wrens. Everything was there. What attracted her attention the most was a pair of white jade canaries. They had the same white feathers and red eyes, and their cries were melodious. Her grandfather liked to play with birds. She would occasionally hear him recite a few lines from the bird scriptures, so she knew that these canaries were not ordinary rare. Xanlu had seen her fair share of gardens. She had even been to the imperial garden in the imperial palace. However, she had never seen someone like Yushu, who made her garden look like a wild mountain garden and raised a group of intelligent and adorable birds and beasts. This was the first time she had seen such a thing. Because of this, Xanlu's interest in touring the garden increased. She dragged Yushu walking here and there, picking flowers and weeds, playing with birds and chasing foxes. She had a lot of fun. Before leaving, Xanlu hugged a fluffy little rabbit that she had picked up in the grass nest. She was reluctant to let it go, so Yushu simply asked someone to go to the garden and catch another rabbit, making up an even number for her to carry away. In the evening, when Yu Xiaoxiu came back from school, he went straight to his room. There were several independent small courtyards in the mansion, so everyone didn't need to squeeze under the same roof. Yushu had asked for Yu Xiaoxiu's opinion. She gave him a separate courtyard. Aside from Bairan, a book attendant, she also assigned a manservant named Chun Er to serve him. There were many benefits to being a sinful slave who came out of the consecrated people's courtyard. The first one was his duty. The sky hadn't darkened yet, and Chun Er was already guarding the grass path at the second gate. When she saw Yu Xiaoxiu coming from afar, she called him second young master and ran over to take the bag of books from Yu Xiaoxiu's shoulder. Now that the two families had come together, in order to avoid a mess, Yu Shu and Zhao Hui had discussed it and set up a new rule. They had the servants call her eldest young miss. Yu Xiaoxiu was the second young master, He Xiaochuan was the third young master, old madam he was the old madam, and Aunt Chui was no longer someone else's concubine. She called her Madam Yu. Second young master came back early today. You didn't go to the medical center? Although Chun Er was 1 year younger than Yu Xiaoxiu, he was like a bamboo pole. He was half a head taller than Yu Xiaoxiu. He held the bag of books with both hands and followed behind Yu Xiaoxiu with his back bent. He looked like a shrimp, which was quite comical. Yu Xiaoxiu wanted to laugh when he saw him, but he didn't tell him to straighten his back and walk. I didn't go. Today master gave me a lot of homework to do. A few days ago many servants were bought into the mansion. On the second day Chun Er came, his sister called him in alone to give him a lesson, making him truly realize that his identity was different from before. His biological sister became a high-ranking official of the Celestial Commissioner, and even the Emperor bestowed her a title. The family lived in a mansion that was even grander than the Ji family's old residence. Dozens of servants obediently called him young master. They lived a life where they could stretch their hands and open their mouths to eat. Although Yu Xiaoxiu hadn't adapted yet, he clearly knew that he was no longer the burden of sleeping on a wooden bed in the servants' room of the Ji family's compound in Yang City, eating leftovers. Instead, he had changed from a half-servant to a master. The master and servant followed into the small courtyard. Bairan, who was wearing a brand new silk gown, came out of Yu Xiaoxiu's study with a stack of red paper dotted with gold. When she saw them, she stopped to greet them. Second young master, school is over. Yu Xiaoxiu nodded and walked over to pick up the top invitation in his hand. He looked at it and asked, "Have you finished copying the name list my sister gave you?" Yu Shu had already sorted out the guest list for the 12th of August. Because all the servants in the mansion thought that Bairan's handwriting was the most pleasing to the eye, she gave him the task of copying the invitations. As a result, Bairan didn't follow Yu Xiaoxiu to Baichuan Academy to accompany him in his studies. Instead, he woke up early in the morning and stayed in Yu Xiaoxiu's small study to copy the invitations. He wanted to finish the task eldest miss had given him as soon as possible. "I've finished copying. I'll send it to eldest Mississippi." Byran had grown a lot darker than when he was first bought. His originally weak little pretty face had a bit more heroic spirit. "Then go quickly and come back quickly. Don't delay dinner." Yu Xiaoxiu affectionately patted him on the shoulder. Even if there were many servants in the family, Byran was different to him. This youth was smarter than him and was also a good scholar. He had once been a young master of a wealthy family, so there was no way he could order him around like a servant. Byran softly snorted. He glanced at Chun'er, who was following behind Yu Xiaoxiu with a hunched back. She was wearing the same short-sleeved shirt that the mansion had just given to the servants. His heart was slightly bitter. He lowered his head and quickly left. Not long after Yu Shu sent Xen Lu away, Byran sent over the invitations. She randomly picked a few and was very satisfied with the neat and beautiful writing. She called Yun Do, who was at the side, to give Byran a piece of silver. "Well done. In the future I will add another set of paper and ink to Xiaoxiu's room. You should practice more when you have time. Don't delay it." A trace of happiness appeared on Byran's slightly reserved face, and she quickly thanked Yu Shu. After receiving the reward, she withdrew and didn't stay for even a moment longer. It was dark outside. Lanterns were hung under the eaves of the courtyard. Byran walked along the porch. He saw two people coming out from the opposite corner of the door. He recognized the one in front. She was the new maid of eldest Mississippi. Her name was Lin. The one behind had her head hanging down. He could only see half of her white neck. Byran looked at her and quickly withdrew his gaze. He silently said in his heart, "Don't look at indecent things," and hurriedly went out of the courtyard. Xener led the recovered Akiko to see Yu Shu. She didn't pay attention to where Byran went out. Akiko was more sensitive. She was walking when she suddenly stopped. She turned her head and stared at the direction of the empty courtyard. There was some doubt in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Saw her stop and look around. She pulled her and called her back to reality. Akiko quickly shook her head and timidly said, "Nothing." Chapter 636. The autumn had passed, and the weather had turned cold in the 8th month of the lunar calendar. Yu Shu generously asked Pei Jing to find a few capable tailors to buy a set of autumn clothes for the servants who had been bought in. She did not skimp on the material, and all the clothes were made of sturdy silk. She also gave each of them a pair of thick-soled shoes. And Beikue wore a clean shirt with a small sleeve, and her hair was neatly combed into a pair of hair that hung behind her ears. She half knelt in front of Yu Shu with her hands clasped on her knees, so that Yu Shu could only see her bangs. With such an obedient and pleasant behavior, it was hard to imagine that she was a foreigner from Japan. Not long ago, Yu Shu brought her back from the concubine and asked about her background. After the incident, Beikue fell seriously ill. Taking into account that Beikue had been tortured in the prison, she was placed in the backyard by Yu Shu and asked someone to take care of her. As for Beikue's talent, Yu Shu wasn't in a hurry to use her. "This servant greets master and thanks you for saving my life. This servant has no way to repay you and is willing to work like an ox or a horse for you." And Beikue ate, drank, and slept well at Yu Shu's place for a period of time. She didn't have to deal with the dead anymore, and Xener and Liner who took care of her were gentle and kind. She was secretly glad that she had escaped from the abyss of suffering, and her gratitude towards Yu Shu increased day by day. Yu Shu heard her say the words "servant" so smoothly. She didn't know how many times she had rehearsed these two sentences in her mind, but she just wanted her to know how to repay her kindness. "Get up. Your injuries haven't healed yet, so there's no need to bow. I heard that you have something to tell me." Yu Shu naturally wouldn't ignore this weirdo who could see people's souls. She had the two maidservants take turns to take care of her, and they would ask about her every day when they came back. Today, when she asked about her, told her that this child wanted to see her. Yu Shu was curious about what Beikue wanted to tell her. It shouldn't be just to show her loyalty. Yes, this servant doesn't dare to hide something from master. Beikue shrunk her shoulders and secretly raised her head to look at the maidservant beside Yu Shu. She was hesitant about whether she should say it directly. Yu Shu saw her strange expression and had Xener and the others leave. She thought that Beikue couldn't possibly have anything important to say. She must have seen someone's soul come out of their body. It was either someone who was already dead or someone who was about to die. Seeing her hesitant appearance, could it be that it was because of these maidservants by her side? Alright, if you have something to say, just say it. Yushu knew what was going on and waited for Nbiki to continue. Yes. Nbiki lowered her head and said softly, I saw a ball of light above Master's head. Yushu was stunned for a moment, and then her expression turned ugly. The Japanese girl in front of her had yin-yang eyes, and she could see the ghosts on the bodies of the dead. She could also see the omen of death, which was the ball of light she was talking about. If that was the case, wouldn't she be at death's door? Are you sure you didn't see wrong? She couldn't believe it. Yesterday she had burned a pill of mahu incense to make a divination for herself. She had been very lucky recently. How could there be a death calamity? Look up at me. Don't lower your head. What light are you talking about? Do I have it on my body right now? And Baekue obediently looked up at her and answered, Yes. It's the same as the first time I saw Master in the palace. There's a red light on both of you. Hearing this, Yushu's expression turned cold. She sat up straight and stared at Baekue. You saw me when you saw me in the palace. Why did you only tell me now? I've brought you back for some time. Aren't you afraid that I'll suddenly die one day? Seeing Yushu's unfriendly expression, Baekue realized that she hadn't made herself clear. She immediately blushed. Afraid that Yushu would misunderstand, she shook her head like a rattled drum. No. That's not what Kuezi meant. She looked like she was about to cry. Her knees went soft and she knelt down. She stuttered again, Kuezi, I saw a spiritual light on Master's forehead. No, it wasn't on the top of your head, it was right here. On the dead, it's a ghost light. On the living, there's a spiritual light. There's such a big ball. Master's spiritual light isn't on the top of your head, but on your forehead. There's only a tiny bit of it and it's red. It's the first time Kuezi has seen such a spiritual light. I don't know why, but when I saw Master again after the Water and Continent Conference, you were alive and well. No, so you wouldn't die. Kuezi isn't what you think. She gestured a bunch of things on her forehead. Yushu barely understood what she meant. After sorting it out, Baekue called the out-of-body soul of the dead ghost light, and the out-of-body soul of the living spiritual light. Normally, when she saw a spiritual light, she would die within a few days. However, from the end of the Water and Continent Conference to when Baekue saw her again in the residential institute, it had already been 10 days to half a month. She had exceeded the time limit of death, but she was still safe and sound. Therefore, Baekue didn't think that the spiritual light she saw on her body was a sign that she was about to die. More importantly, Baekue had seen people who were about to die in the past. The spiritual light was on the top of their heads, but hers was on their forehead. Looking at Baekue pointing at her forehead, Yushu couldn't help but reach out and touch her forehead. It was just between her eyebrows, half an inch above. She gestured. Was there a red spiritual light the size of a copper coin? She picked up the cup on the coffee table and looked down at her forehead with the reflection of the tea. There was nothing. Yushu was deep in thought. If Nbiki wasn't lying, then what she saw was undoubtedly her soul. Since it wasn't a sign that a person was about to die, then why did her soul leave her body? Thinking of a possibility, Yushu's heart couldn't help but beat faster. Heaven and earth knew that this body wasn't hers. The original owner had died 800 years ago. Could it be that Abe could see the light on her forehead because she wasn't the original one? Is this the first time you've seen me like this? Yushu choked. He unconsciously lowered his voice and questioned Nbiki. Nbiki nodded hurriedly. Have you told anyone else about me? Yushu was a little worried. She finally knew why Baekue stared at her like that when she first saw her in the palace. She was afraid that Baekue would report everything to the two Donging people with her and cause more trouble. Nbiki quickly shook his head again. No, Kuezi didn't tell anyone. Yushu only felt that she had guessed the truth. Her mood was inevitably messed up. Her tone wasn't very good. Watch your mouth. Don't mention this to anyone again. Do you understand? Yes, I won't tell anyone. Master, don't worry. Nbiki answered carefully. She didn't dare to ask more. She was afraid that if Yushu was unhappy, she would drive her away. Yushu was lost in thought for a while. Her eyes moved and she saw Baekue was still kneeling there. She was trembling and her face was pale. It was unbearable to look at. All right, get up. Don't lie on the ground so easily. Yushu's expression softened. Baekue told her everything because she was honest. If she deliberately hid it, how would she know that she had already been exposed? She called Exener in and pointed at Baekue. Let her rest for a few more days. Bring her here when she's better. Take care of her for now and teach her the rules. And Baikue understood Chinese very well. She knew that this meant that she was fine. Yushu didn't blame her and even allowed her to stay. She was so happy that she squeezed out 2 drops of tears and hurriedly followed behind Xen. Xener could tell that her mistress treated this girl with a strange background very differently. She was willing to spend money to treat people's illnesses and medicines. She didn't work for free. Perhaps she had other uses for her, so she didn't dare to slight her. She agreed readily and took Embaki's hand to leave. When they reached the courtyard, she didn't let go. Instead, she asked in a low voice, "Why is your hand so cold? Are you okay?" "Sister Xen, I'm fine." Ever since Baikue was given as a gift to the great General Ashikaga and separated from her mother, she had never been cared for like this. Her nose turned sour and she wanted to cry again, but she held it back. "Sai, it's good that you're fine." Xen walked with her to the corner door. Seeing that there was no one around, she whispered to her, "I don't know what you did in the past, where you came from, or what crime you committed to be sold into the penitentiary. But since you're out, don't always think about the past. To tell you the truth, it's our good fortune to be able to follow a mistress like Mistress. Mistress is capable and kind-hearted. She's willing to treat us well. If we serve her wholeheartedly and listen to her, we won't have to worry about not having a good life in the future. Don't you think so?" Xener thought that Baikue was being stubborn in front of Yushu, so she comforted her out of goodwill. She didn't know that Baikue's awareness was even higher than hers. "Sister is right." Baikue nodded and said with a serious face, "Whatever Mistress tells me to do, I'll do it. I won't go wrong." The whole family had dinner together in old Madame He's courtyard, except for Aunt Chui, who said that she had a headache and didn't come. She asked someone to send the food over. After dinner, Yu Xiaoxiu went to see his mother. Yushu was too lazy to put on a show at home, so she didn't go. She took Yundo back to her room, and the maidservants poured tea for her to rinse her mouth and wash her hands. She sat on the recliner absent-mindedly and tossed and turned, thinking about what Baikue had said. The more she thought about it, the more certain she was that the thing that came out of her forehead was all because she was wearing it. This was thought-provoking. Baikue's seemingly useless yin-yang eye not only could see living souls and the undead, but it could also tell that someone wasn't original. Yushu's thoughts wandered. She couldn't help but wonder if there was someone like her in this world who had transmigrated from hundreds of years in the future. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about this before, but she hadn't thought about it carefully. However, Baikue's appearance forced her to face this matter. What if she had someone else like her? Could it be that they weren't far away and were in the capital? Was that person a mediocre person, or was he hiding this secret just like her, and was doing well in this blind dynasty? Chapter 637. After the Water and Land Conference, the Japanese envoy had been ordered to occupy the islands of the East Sea. Once it was verified, the court debated whether to send troops to attack the Japanese as a punishment. The opinions were mainly divided into 2 groups. One group thought that the Japanese island nation was unfavorable in crossing the sea and that it was best to send envoys to the Japanese first to denounce and question them. If the other side apologized sincerely, there was no need to mobilize troops. The other group thought that the Japanese great General Ashikaga was ambitious and dared to covet the territory of the court. If they didn't send troops to attack, it wouldn't be enough to deter Zhou. Both sides stuck to their own opinions and refused to give in. Emperor Zhaoqing was hesitant. Half a month after the Water and Land Conference ended, there was still no plan for this matter. With such a hot topic of discussion, few people paid attention to the murder case of the Taisher Library, which had also happened during the Water and Land Conference. Shui Rui had been investigating silently for the past few days. Nobody urged him to hurry up, and the entire case seemed to be making no progress, but in reality, only Shui Rui himself knew exactly what he had found out. That day there were still 2 groups of people arguing endlessly. Shui Rui was a 5th-rank Shaoqing of the Supreme Court. He was young and inexperienced. Although he had handled a few major cases, he didn't have much to say in the court. He didn't join in the fun. He stood among the civil officials on the left and watched the 2 sides argue coldly. As the princess came of age and moved out of the palace, the factions in the court became increasingly distinct. The 6 ministries were one. Although Yin Tianhou and Shui Lingnan, the 2 ministers, were jointly in charge, they were also clearly divided. Yin Tianhou had been the chief examiner of the imperial examinations 3 times in the dozen years of Zhaoqing. During the reign of the previous emperor, he had come from the Ministry of Appointments and held the position of Minister of Appointments. As a result, the current Minister of Appointments, Minister of Revenue and Minister of Works were all his students. The Right Minister Shui Lingnan had come from leading troops. In the first year of Zhaoqing, he had already made great contributions and held the position of Minister of War for 10 years. The Ministry of War and the Ministry of Justice all followed his lead. And the Ministry of Rights, because of its authority, was always controlled by the Celestial Commissioner. Among the 6 ministries, the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of War were at the forefront, followed by the Ministry of Revenue. The Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Rights were both government offices with little power. The Ministry of Works was a fertile land, but it didn't have much real power. Of Emperor Zhaoqing's few remaining sons, the 4th Prince Li Si had been stripped of his title and banished from the capital, the 8th Prince Lu Du was incompetent and mediocre, and the 11th Prince had been banished to Ascending Cloud Monastery a while ago. The remaining 12, 15 and 16 princes were either without support or too young. Empress Rui was childless. Without a legitimate eldest son, the 7th Prince Lu Hao, who was greatly favored by Emperor Zhaoqing and had the backing of the Yin family, was tacitly accepted as the first candidate for the Eastern Palace. In comparison, the 9th Prince, who had been sent to Mount Longhu since he was a child to cultivate his moral character, was much weaker. However, he had Shui Lingnan as his grandfather, so it was not impossible that he would not be able to fight for the throne in the future. The Celestial Commissioner was firmly appointed by Zhu Muzhao. It was not an exaggeration to say that his words were the law. Zhu Muzhao was deeply trusted by Emperor Zhaoqing. In recent years, the Zhu family had not had a woman enter the palace as a concubine, so they could be considered to be in the middle. Count Zhongyong's residence had not been as glorious as it had been in recent years, but the Rui family's connections in the capital could not be underestimated. This kind of connections was not built on scholarly honors. To put it bluntly, it was based on nepotism. The Emperor of Qing had taken back his military power, but he had not been idle. The current empress was his biological sister, and the matriarch of Duke Jing was his aunt. His eldest daughter was married to Junior Supervisor Ren of the Imperial Astronomer. His second daughter was the daughter-in-law of Guo Huaiyan, an official of the Supreme Court. His third daughter was betrothed to the heir of the Marquis of Junan, who guarded Yunnan. His youngest daughter was unmarried, and it was Rui Zizhu who was supposed to marry the Shui family. These were only the direct descendants. The rest of the girls were too many to count. It was hard for Rui Subaru to manage like this. Empress Rui could only blame her bad luck. She did not give birth to a single child, so she could not protect her first wife's son. The count's residents had gathered a network of connections, but had no place to place them. Therefore, no matter whether it was Shui Lingnan or Yin Tianho, they appeared to be amiable on the surface, but no matter how dirty they were in private, no one would take the initiative to find trouble with Rui Subaru. They were afraid that the count would take things too hard and stand on the other side. That was no laughing matter. For example, it was Prime Minister Shui's faction who insisted on directly sending troops to attack Wei country. Those who thought that envoys should be sent to denounce Wei country first were mostly Prime Minister Yin's people. Those who supported the two sides were all Rui Subaru's relatives and friends. Zhu Muzhao did not say anything, so no one in the Celestial Commissioner said anything. Several princes and dukes stood in front of the civil and military officials. Prince Xiang, who was dressed in an official robe, lazily lowered his eyelids, as if this matter had nothing to do with him. In the corner, Emperor Zhaoqing rubbed the bridge of his nose. Tiredness appeared on his face. With one sentence he ended the debate for the day. Everyone's words are reasonable. Let me think about it and make a decision tomorrow. Court is dismissed. After this year's ancestral worship, Emperor Zhaoqing fell ill. After he recovered, he was not as energetic as before. The court officials all knew that, so it would be strange if they did not have any opinions. Dismissed. The eunuch in charge of etiquette shouted, and the civil and military officials bowed. The first one said, "Long live your majesty." Then, after waiting for the corner of Emperor Zhaoqing's robe to disappear from sight, the officials waited for a while before they left. It was not the day of the Lunar New Year, so there were only about 100 people in the court. Those who left first were the nobles and powerful officials. Shui Rui did not follow closely behind Prime Minister Yin like Yin Yuanrong, but waited for most of the people to leave before he walked out. Unexpectedly, as soon as he walked down the 9 dragon steps, he was stopped by someone. "Vice Minister Shui, please wait." Shui Rui turned his head and saw Ren Qiming dismissing a subordinate who was talking to him and walking towards him. His heart skipped a beat and he guessed what was going on. "Vice Supervisor Ren." Shui Rui cupped his hands and bowed slightly. How is the investigation of the murder case in Taisher Library last month? Is there any progress? Ren Qiming asked. Shui Rui sighed softly. I am ashamed that I have not been able to find out the murderer's background. Ren Qiming said, there have been a series of deaths in the library, causing the students there to panic. I will have to trouble Sir Shui to spend more effort on this matter. It is better to find the murderer as soon as possible. Hearing his words, if Shui Rui did not know about the case of the murderer, he would think that Ren Qiming was simply concerned about the safety of the students in Taisher Library. Sir Ren, don't worry. I will not slack off. Ren Qiming nodded, turned around, and left. Shui Rui stood on the spot for a while until someone came up to strike up a conversation. Only then did he leave with that person. According to the schedule, it was Imperial Consort Shui's turn to attend to him today. After the court was dismissed, Emperor Zhaoqing did not even change out of his court attire. He strolled around the imperial garden for a while, and before the sky turned dark, he immediately set off for Zhongzue Palace. Along the way he did not send the eunuchs to inform Emperor Zhaoqing, so when Emperor Zhaoqing stepped into the palace, Imperial Consort Shui was still sitting by the window cutting flower branches. There was a pot of hibiscus that had just bloomed, and the pink flower leaves were glistening with silvery dew. However, it was not as beautiful as half of her face. Hearing the sound of footsteps, she turned her head and was startled. Immediately, she smiled like a flower and did not even bother to put on her shoes. Putting down her pliers, she got off the bed and was about to kneel down to pay her respects. However, her words were a little coquettish. Your Majesty, why didn't you inform me that you are coming? I haven't even changed my clothes. If these two sentences were spoken by any other concubine in the palace, Emperor Zhaoqing would have fallen out with her, thought that the other party was being disrespectful, and walked away on the spot. However, facing the woman in front of him, he always had some tenderness and guilt that could not be dissolved. How could he not be happy? Beloved, quickly get up. Emperor Zhaoqing did not wait for others to help him. He went forward to help Imperial Consort Shui up and pulled her to sit on the bed. With a pleasant expression, he said, I walked over to your side unintentionally. He then looked up and down at the peach-colored unlined garment on her body. Her skin and bones that were exposed through the collar and cuffs were as white as crystal. He frowned and said to the palace maids kneeling below, It's getting cold. Why don't you put on a few more clothes for your mistress? You are just sitting by the window to enjoy the wind. If she falls ill, I will not spare you. The palace maids serving in front of her were so frightened that they lowered their heads and apologized. Imperial Consort Shui gently shook Emperor Zhaoqing's arm and said in a gentle voice, It's my fault for being afraid of the heat. Seeing that the sun is out today, I am too lazy to wear anything. They didn't listen to my advice. Now that you have come, you must stay and eat with me. In the morning I ordered the kitchen to stew fresh deer tendons. This kind of weather is just right to eat. With just 2 sentences the matter was over. Emperor Zhaoqing's attention was diverted. Imperial Consort Shui gave a look. Song Lan, the senior palace maid, hurriedly took a few servants and quietly left. She secretly broke out in a cold sweat and then rejoiced. For the next few months, the Book of Heaven had been arranged according to Phoenix Perching Palace's wishes. Although the number of days that the mistress served in bed was not less, it was either next to the lovely new nobles or next to the Empress and fair Consort Shu, the 2 big heads. Running over to eat with the mistress in broad daylight almost no longer happened. Fortunately, the newly appointed imperial lady favored our mistress. Otherwise, as the days passed, there would be less and less hope. Imperial Consort Shui chatted with Emperor Zhaoqing for a while. She didn't talk about court politics or ask about his worries. She only picked out a few interesting things that had happened in Zhongchui's palace and told him. In the end, she even had someone bring out a large orange-red camellia to play with Emperor Zhaoqing. Emperor Zhaoqing saw that the flowers were well taken care of. After asking in detail, he discovered that this rare-colored camellia had been cultivated by Imperial Consort Shui herself last year. Only when it had taken a good shape did she present it in front of him. Emperor Zhaoqing appreciated this interest and asked her, Everything was fine. Why are you in the mood to take care of these flowers and plants? Imperial Consort Shui's smile froze. She lowered her head and gently plucked at the green leaves. With some reminiscence in her eyes, she chuckled lightly and said, Your Majesty, do you still remember that when I was still in my boudoir, you once asked my eldest brother to give me a pot of flowers? It was a camellia. In the blink of an eye, so many years have passed, but I still remember the blooming of the flower, just like the sunset glow of the setting sun. Then her beautiful eyes turned to look at Emperor Zhao Qing. Pointing at the camellia between the two of them, she asked, "Look, does the color of this flower look like the one you gave me back then?" Emperor Zhao Qing was a bit dazed. He vaguely remembered such an incident, but he had long forgotten what color the flower was. Seeing that she was reminiscing about the past, he couldn't help but think of when he was young and spirited. He felt guilty and couldn't bear to ruin her mood. He only nodded and said, "That's the color. It's good that you didn't forget." He then lovingly held it up and said, "Since I gave you one back then, why don't you return it to me now? I like it and will take it back to look at." How could noble consort Shui not agree? She happily gave it to him and said with a bit of heartache, "Then your majesty will definitely have people look after it. If it can bloom one more night, it will be one more night." Emperor Zhao Qing reached out to wipe her face and teased, "You still don't want to part with it? How about this? The flower was raised with great care by you, so I can't take it for free. If you have any wishes, why don't you bring them up now? We will agree to them and treat it as an exchange." Noble consort Shui shook her head and said, "Your majesty has treated me well. I have nothing to ask for." However, Emperor Zhao Qing didn't agree. He insisted on her saying a wish and fulfilling it for her. The two of them pushed back and forth. Seeing that Emperor Zhao Qing was about to lose his patience, noble consort Shui timely relented. She rubbed her forehead and thought for a while before saying to him, "My son's wedding date is approaching, but your majesty knows that my nephew Qing Bai is already in his 20s. His marriage has been delayed until now and his brother and sister-in-law died early. As his aunt, I can't just ignore it. So, I want to ask for your grace. Allow me to pick a good one for him. In the future, when I choose a good family's young lady, I ask that your majesty personally appoint the marriage." Emperor Zhao Qing hadn't thought that she would bring this up. It wasn't for herself or for Lu Tan but for Shui Rui. There was some thought in his eyes, but it only lasted for a moment. Seeing the anticipation on noble consort Shui's face, he slowly agreed, "We will do as you say. This concubine thanks your majesty." Noble consort Shui immediately stood up in joy to give her thanks. She silently let out a breath. This matter had made her stifled for 3 years. Now the emperor had let it go. She didn't have to let the empress disgust her for the 10th princess' death. Chapter 638. On the 6th day of the 8th month, Yushu's big house on Baochang Street officially hung a plaque on the door and opened the door to greet guests. This signified that she, the recently popular female disguise master, had finally established her own house from a female fortune teller to a female imperial official, and then to meowing messenger. In fact, before she hung it on the door, Yushu had hesitated about what words to inscribe on the plaque. She wanted to use her surname to establish a foothold, or she could use a fashionable and elegant name for her residence, such as Prince Xiang's Dingbo residence. However, after she consulted Shui Rui's opinion, she still honestly chose the 2 words Yu residence. She forced Shui Rui to write the words so she didn't waste any effort to ask for any famous calligraphy. On the day of hanging it on the door, people lit firecrackers, burned incense and prayed to the door god. There were many onlookers on the street, and they surrounded a section of the gate. They all saw an offering table on the doorstep. The table was full of offerings, incense and candles. A young man wearing a bright green robe with big sleeves was facing the north, and his back was facing the crowd. He was holding 3 sticks of incense and kowtowing. There was a lot of discussion in the crowd. Some passers-by murmured, "How old is he to become the head of a household and buy such a big house? I really don't know which family spoils him." This remark was heard by the people next to him and they laughed. A quick-witted person patted his shoulder and said, "Brother, don't talk nonsense. The owner of the house who is burning incense is not someone you can casually make up. Have you heard of the meowing messenger personally appointed by the emperor? Don't be fooled by her young age. She is a disciple of an immortal family. She can call the wind and rain and turn beans into soldiers." The person said in surprise, "Isn't the meowing messenger a woman?" This. Looking at the person burning incense in front of the door, he could see that the person's figure was more slender than that of a man. It was indeed a woman. Yushu opened the red carpet in front of the main gate and gave some instructions. Zhou, who brought a few servants with him to distribute the wedding cakes to the neighbors who were watching the bustle. The fist-sized cakes were filled with bean paste and peanut stuffing, filling up 2 large baskets. Every bite of the cakes added liveliness to the new house. On the day of hanging the door, Yushu did not intend to invite outsiders. She only sent someone to the minister's mansion to inform them. On this day Shui Rui still came. It was bustling at the front. The main door was wide open and the voices of people could be heard. The women folk stayed in the backyard and did not come out, but He Fangji and Pei Jing stayed in the living room at the front to keep them company and talk to Shui Rui. Yu Shu was now a 5th-rank official, and her rank was not lower than Shui Rui's. So He Fangji, a common doctor, and Pei Jing, a businessman, did not have to be reserved when they sat in front of the minister's mansion's eldest son. In addition, Shui Rui deliberately lowered his position and regarded himself as a junior, so the three of them had a lot to talk about. At first, when I met little Yu, I thought that she would be a successful person. Later, when I found out that she was a girl, I felt that it was a pity more than once. Who would have thought that she would be able to live up to expectations? Now she has a scholarly title and an official position. Even as her uncle, thanks to her, my life has been getting smoother and smoother. Pei Jing felt honored when he mentioned Yu Shu, and he wasn't stingy in the slightest to fiercely praise this niece of his that he'd picked up for free in front of He Fangji and Shui Rui. Indeed, because Yu Shu got rid of Bai Qing and replaced him as the chief manager of the Taiheng Chamber of Commerce, and because Yu Shu provided the unique crystal business, he not only earned a lot of money, but also gained a foothold in the capital's Chamber of Commerce overnight. Even the chief manager of the Tongji Chamber of Commerce, which was known as the capital's first, had to smile and call him Mr. Pei. When Shui Rui heard this, he smiled and turned to look at the figure walking over from the direction of the main door. Seeing that Yu Shu had arrived, He Fangji asked her to entertain Shui Rui and led his brother-in-law to the back to see their son. Earlier, he had asked Zhao Hui to remind Yu Shu about the misunderstandings between men and women. Now that she was an official, she could go in and out of the court, so these small matters were no longer restricted. After Yu Shu's mansion was completed, this was the first time Shui Rui returned home. The two of them got busy. After not seeing each other for some time, the first thing she did was to take him to the garden. It took a lot of effort to merge the two gardens into one and make it look like I wanted. Because of this, it took half a month, otherwise I would have moved here long ago. Last month, I wanted to invite you over to take a look, but I couldn't find you. Let's go, I'll take you to see the scenery. Shui Rui listened to her boasting, as if her garden was not worse than the Dingbo Hall that the emperor gave to the Prince of Xiang. He secretly laughed at her exaggeration but didn't say it out loud. As soon as he stepped into the garden, he didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. Instead, the air seemed to be exceptionally fresh. However, after following her for half a circle in the garden, he heard a clear cry. Turning his head, he saw a pair of red-crowned cranes with white feathers standing by a small pond not far away, foraging for food. Finally, he couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. How can you raise something like this? Cranes were mascots. Not to mention that these things were not easy to get, many rich and powerful people in the capital tried to raise them in captivity. But after the summer, these birds had to migrate for the winter. If they were kept in a cage, they wouldn't eat or drink until they starved to death. If they were released to wander around, they would fly away. But Yu Shu's pair of birds were left outside, letting them wander around. Their feathers were bright and clean, and they looked like they were in good spirits. Yu Shu looked at him with a puzzled expression. Why can't I raise them? Although this pair of white cranes are a bit expensive, they are very docile. When Shui Rui heard this, his expression became strange. You just let them outside like this. You don't even lock them in the cage at night? Why would I lock them up? They won't fly around. Shui Rui asked a few more questions, and then he learned that since she put the birds in the garden half a month ago, they have never been locked up. As long as the keepers put fresh fish and shrimps into the pond every day, they will only walk around in the garden. Occasionally they will fly over the house and come back to eat. They don't go far at all. Shui Rui was surprised, but when he saw Yu Shu's expression of, "This bird is very easy to raise, what's so strange about it?" he swallowed back the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Then he began to pay attention to the layout of the garden. He didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but he always felt that the trees in her garden were too green, the flowers were too blooming, and everywhere was fresh. It was obviously autumn, but there was no sign of them withering. It felt like there was a wall between them. No matter whether it was winter or summer outside, when they entered the garden, it was spring. When he thought up to here, Shui Rui couldn't help but smile, and then he looked at Yu Shu, who led the way excitedly in front of him, and he said in his heart, "I'm thinking too much. How could there possibly be such a miraculous place? Let me tell you, I arranged this garden according to the Chiman magic circle taught by my master. I buried several magic circle eyes under the ground, and every flower and tree here is very particular. I dare not say anything else, but the feng shui of this piece of land can't be better than it in the whole Anling city. Yushu was inspired by the feng shui pond that raised crystals, and she applied the 8 gates life and death tactics taught by Qing Zheng to this chain garden. Only a master like her who became a monk halfway dared to be so bold. Was she not afraid of accidentally destroying the feng shui and killing people? The two walked around the garden and chose to sit in a small hall near the pond. Hearing Yushu's order, the maid quickly ran to serve tea and snacks. "What do you think of my garden?" The two sat next to the window railing. Not far away they saw the pair of red-crowned cranes and a few mandarin ducks swimming in the pond. Excellent. Shui Rui could have a lot of praise, but when he said it, he felt that her garden was vulgar. There are a lot of empty places and it lacks a good name. He was in the birds and the fragrance of flowers and he felt refreshed. He was in a good mood, so he recommended a few names for the scenery in her garden. Not only was Yushu happy, she seized the opportunity when the maidservant came to deliver tea and snacks to ask someone to bring a brush and ink for the study room, and she asked Shui Rui to write quite a few words while he was in high spirits. Shui Rui's calligraphy was taught by the previous great scholar of the Tao Wenguan, Song Shaoxian. He was a famous calligrapher of the present age, but he was not bound by fame. He retired in the 9th year of Zhaoqing. "I see that your small pond has running water and there is a square stone by the pond. Later, find a craftsman to chisel the words." Shui Rui picked up the pen and wrote down the 2 words, Jiao Gao. Crane's cry and Jiao Gao sound heard in the wild. I just passed by a corridor and the sound of birds under the corridor filled my ears. There was a pair of canaries, very beautiful. Shui Rui picked up the pen again and wrote down the 2 words, Sherwen. In the green forest and wild house, the setting sun is clear. When you take off your scarf and walk alone, you can hear the birds. Then in one breath Shui Rui named the attic in the garden, the pavilion, the cave door, the mountain rock, and the small hall they were sitting in. Yushu, who was illiterate, couldn't tell good from bad, but she knew that the names were very meaningful. "Thank you, eldest brother." Yushu joyfully counted the stack of words that Shui Rui wrote for her. Then she blew the ink dry before neatly stacking them on a wooden tray. After that she asked Lin to take it to her study room and put it away. "Tomorrow I will ask someone to find a craftsman. After the words are hung, I will invite you to come." Shui Rui was carrying the gold-stamped invitation for her banquet. She had personally given it to him when he came today. Counting the days, there were only a few days left, so he thought for a while and said, "There will be a lot of people coming that day. In order to prevent those careless people from casually barging in and spoiling the flowers and plants in your garden, and frightening the birds and beasts, I'm afraid that you won't have enough people. How about I assign a few people to guard the garden for you?" He was very clear about the situation of the new Yu residents. A few days ago, Lu Jiong had mentioned to him that she had generously bought people from the concubine's courtyard. It was a worry-free method. However, the people who came from the concubine's courtyard were well behaved, but they were not powerful enough. If they met people who pestered endlessly, they might not be able to deal with them. She had already shown him the guest list for her banquet. There were all kinds of people coming. He came today to give her a reminder. Yushu, on the other hand, was worried that there were villains mixed among the guests, and if they knew some unusual tricks, they would do something to her garden and ruin her feng shui, so when she heard Shui Rui was willing to help, she didn't think too much before agreeing. "That's for the best. I was worried that there would be a lack of people to order around." At this point, Yushu stopped playing around and thought about serious matters. She looked at the maidservant who was walking away and turned to ask Shui Rui, "How is the investigation of the Taisha library case going? Is there any news?" Chao Yuling died and Zhan Shuiyuan died. The murderer was suspected to be the same person, but he was hiding it well. Shui Rui had a smile on his face just now, but now he restrained the corners of his mouth. He looked at her and said quietly, Chapter 639. Emperor Zhaoqing ate lunch in noble consort Shui's palace. After resting for a while, he heard a palace servant report that the great advisor was waiting outside Taiyan Hall. Emperor Zhaoqing had a good nap and had just woken up. He was lying on his side on the bed and saw noble consort Shui sitting in front of the dressing mirror and combing her hair. Hearing that Zhu Muzhao wanted to see him, he closed his eyes to rest for a while before sitting up. He said to noble consort Shui, "Zhen will go and see. If you have nothing to do, why don't you take a walk in the imperial garden? Don't stay cooped up in the palace and wait." The women in the palace, when it was someone's turn to serve in bed, they would stay in the bedroom the whole day, not daring to take even half a step outside, for fear of delaying the emperor's arrival and losing his grace. When the emperor was coming, when he was leaving, he would not follow their wishes, so how could they dare to ask too much? Emperor Zhaoqing had spoken because he felt sorry for noble consort Shui and didn't want her to wait. In the past, she would have said something he liked to hear, politely declined, and then obediently waited in the palace. Noble consort Shui put down her comb with a smile and walked over to help him change. "I will listen to your majesty." But she had been well behaved for so many years and was tired. If she continued to endure, she wouldn't be able to convince herself. After Emperor Zhaoqing left, the chief palace maid Song Lan, who served noble consort Shui, came in with a copper basin. She saw her mistress sitting alone on the soft couch and laughing. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she seemed to be in a good mood. She secretly relaxed. Just now, the emperor had left in such a hurry that she thought something had happened and wouldn't be able to come tonight. Noble consort Shui saw her come in and returned to her senses. She gathered up the robe that Emperor Zhaoqing had put on her before he left and waved at her. "Go, bring over the newly prepared clothes for this season. Ben Gong will pick some. In a moment we will go to the imperial garden to relax." Song Lan obediently went out to give orders. In less than 10 minutes, she had laid out all the clothes of various colors and materials in front of her mistress. After washing up and putting on makeup, noble consort Shui, who was dressed in a golden silk dress, was so beautiful that all the palace maids in the room lowered their heads and didn't dare to raise their eyes, for fear of being dazed by her beauty. Song Lan had already brought along a few competent palace maids and eunuchs. She had brought along tea, fruit, cushions, and utensils. She sent a quick-footed eunuch to clear the way and escorted noble consort Shui out of Zhongzue Palace. There was some distance between Zhongzue Palace and the imperial garden. Imperial consort Shui rode on a palanquin carried by 4 people on the way. When she met 2 groups of young concubines who came out to visit, she leaned against the side of the road and saluted. Only when Imperial consort Shui's carriage was far away did she dare to leave. It didn't take long for the commotion to spread to all the palaces. When they reached the fork in the garden, the eunuch who led the way ran back. Song Lan saw the figure and frowned. She quickly walked up and pulled him to the side. She whispered, "Why are you so flustered? Is there anyone in the garden?" "Jeja." The young eunuch panted and said, "This lowly one saw the Empress Jade carriage parked outside the garden." Her complexion changed slightly as she heard her mistress asking, "What's the matter?" Song Lan walked forward and moved to the side of Imperial consort Shui's legs. She stood on her tiptoes and whispered, "The Empress is there. Mistress, should we go forward or turn back?" She had been an ignorant little maid in Zhongzue Palace for 10 years. To be able to be ordered around by Imperial consort Shui as her confidant, her eyesight must be top-notch. There was a reason for her to be so careful. Ever since that incident 3 years ago when the 10th princess died, their mistress would always avoid the Empress. Other than going to Phoenix Perching Palace on the 1st and 15th day of the month to visit, they would avoid the Empress if they could. But it was rare for her mistress to be in such a good mood. They had already walked to the entrance of the garden. Did they have to turn back? Song Lan complained in her heart. If they really turned around and left, who knew what the rumors would be like in the palace tomorrow? They would repeat the same old story and talk about the headless case of the 10th princess falling from the building. They would say that it was the young miss of the Shui family who killed the 10th princess, so Imperial consort Shui still didn't have the face to see the Empress. "Go forward." Song Lan didn't react for a moment. She raised her eyes and saw Imperial consort Shui's beautiful face. Her long eyebrows slanted to her temples, her eyelashes reflecting the spring in her eyes, bright and dazzling. Song Lan's heart shook. She was slightly panicked but also slightly excited. She lowered her head. "Yes." In the imperial garden, Rue Empress was looking at the red leaves near the Thousand Autumn Pavilion. Sun Gui Ren, who had been favored recently, was sitting at the side. There were also a few beauties and Xiaochang below them. They obediently listened to their conversation, occasionally making a sound, covering their lips as they smiled. Imperial consort Shui held Song Lan's hand as they walked into the garden. From afar she saw the harmonious scene of the wife and Xie. A cold smile floated at the corner of her lips and her steps didn't even pause. The palace servants guarding along the way didn't dare to stop them at first. They watched as Imperial consort Shui's procession majestically walked towards the pavilion, until the great Taijin of Phoenix Perching Palace bowed and stood out, blocking Imperial consort Shui not far from the pavilion. Newbie greets Imperial consort Nyang Yang. "Did you come out to tour the garden?" Imperial consort Shui didn't even glance at him. Song Lan self-consciously said, Ning Gonggong's words are laughable. Why does our Nyang Nyang need to greet a servant like you when she comes out? Disregarding the grievances between the two mistresses, Song Lan also hated this eunuch Ning. When she had been a little palace maid, she had worked in Fengqing Palace. Once, a palace maid of the same rank had broken a vase. Because she had recognized this eunuch Ning as her adoptive father, she had found eunuch Ning to make the decision. In the end, the fault had been placed on her head. If it wasn't for Tao Momo who was passing by interceding for her, she might have been buried somewhere. This lowly one wouldn't dare. Eunuch Ning complained, but inside he didn't care. Who didn't know that Imperial Consort Shui was like a cat when she saw the Empress? It's just that the Empress is currently admiring the scenery in front. Afraid that random people would come in and disturb her, she told Newbie to stand guard here. If Imperial Consort Nyang Nyang wants to go over, please wait here for a moment. Allow Newbie to go and inform her. Song Lan heard the phrase random people in his words and her face flushed in anger. A lowly eunuch dared to beat around the bush and insult their mistress. She really wanted to give him 2 slaps. Before she could shout, Imperial Consort Shui spoke first. No need. Since the Empress is also here, Ben Gong will personally go and greet her. Finishing, she waved her hand for eunuch Ning to leave. Eunuch Ning didn't dare to listen to her. Half a minute ago, when Imperial Consort Shui's sedan had arrived outside the Imperial Garden, someone had come to report. He had been careful and secretly sent a palace maid to report to Rui Empress. But Rui Empress only replied, I understand, and didn't give any clear orders. Her meaning was for him to think of a way to stop her and not let her go over. Eunuch Ning had served the Empress for many years and always had this thought. Kunling Bureau had changed to Darren. When the 8th month's book of Kun came down, the hearts of the people in the Hogong were wavering. The palace maids without any support were like headless flies, not knowing where they should go to try their luck. Today the Empress wanted to embarrass Imperial Consort Shui to appease those Feipin and make them understand one thing. No matter how Kunling Bureau recruited, the one whose words counted the most in the Hogong was still her, the mistress of the 6 palaces. Nyang Nyang, don't make it difficult for this lowly one. Eunuch Ning didn't move. It wasn't that there wasn't a path on the side. It was fine to go around, but as an honored imperial consort, why would she go around the path of a eunuch like him? But he hadn't expected that in the next moment, Imperial Consort Shui would actually move a step to the side and go around him. Eunuch Ning stilled. His mind was filled with the thought that he couldn't ruin the Empress' plans. He brainlessly turned around, knelt down and pulled on the hem of Imperial Consort Shui's robe. Imperial Consort Shui stumbled from being pulled by him. Song Lan hurriedly grabbed her arm to steady her. But seeing that he dared to pull on their mistress, she angrily kicked his shoulder and scolded harshly, You dog! This shout wasn't not loud. It caused all the Feipin sitting in the pavilion to jump in fright. It wasn't that no one had seen Imperial Consort Shui and her entourage walk over, but the Empress hadn't made a sound, so they had pretended to be deaf and dumb, waiting to see a good show. Who would have thought that it would be such an opening? What is this? Sun Guirin first gave a small exclamation, her large and watery eyes staring towards the south. Empress Rui's smile darkened. She gazed at the bright gold in the distance before standing and saying, Go, follow Ben Gong to see. The group followed. When they arrived, they saw Imperial Consort Shui, who usually liked to smile, had a cold expression as she called for someone to support her. The head Taijian of Perching Tree Palace was trembling as he knelt on the ground. The people of Zhongchui Palace were all furious. It was possible to guess what had happened. Empress Rui frowned. She looked at Eunuch Ning, who was kneeling on the ground, and had an idea. She then raised her head to meet Imperial Consort Shui. The two's gazes met in the air and the former asked first, Who was the one making a racket just now? Hearing Empress Rui's question, Song Lan voluntarily admitted, replying to Empress, it was Newbie. Empress Rui was displeased. In the Imperial Garden, it isn't a place for you to shout. Song Lan was sullen, but she still knelt down. Newbie knows she was wrong. Empress Rui ignored her and said directly to Imperial Consort Shui, Mimi, this palace servant has neglected discipline. Today Ben Gong is a small one. What will happen if she shocks the holy self in the future? Imperial Consort Shui thought inside, Empress Rui's habit of striking first hadn't changed at all. Just like in the past, when her eldest brother's only son was in his prime. Before they could discuss marriage, the Empress pushed out the 10th princess at the Lotus Banquet, causing a group of youths in Jing to admire her. Just like in the past when the 10th princess was critically ill, The emperor was furious. Before she could plead for the child in her womb, the empress cried in front of the emperor, forcing her to kneel in front of the hall to beg for forgiveness. The child died in her womb. The emperor didn't demote her but made the 9th prince, who should have returned to Jing that year, stay in the mountain for 2 more years. From then on, she silently watched as Empress Rui used all her methods to control the 6 palaces and endured until now. Not long after her son returned to Jing, this empress made peace with his father through the Count of Zhongyongfu, vainly attempting to marry the daughter of the Rui family into the Shui family to make up for the unfortunate marriage of the 10th princess. The empress had calculated every step. She had calculated well. Lu Fei was old, Xu Fei was useless. As long as she could suppress her, this Gui Fei, the Hogong, would be under her control. If she continued to endure, when that little noble one became pregnant, maybe this Empress Rui really would have a way to adopt a imperial son and let him succeed the throne. Shui Guifei looked at Empress Rui, who was sternly denouncing her. She lightly pushed away the support of the palace attendants and walked forward. She bowed slightly and said, "This newbie was rash. Empress, please punish." She often suffered in front of Empress Rui. Everyone was used to it. Even Empress Rui herself didn't feel that there was anything wrong with her lowering her head to her. Her expression softened and she looked at Song Lan, who was kneeling on the ground. She drawled, "Since she didn't learn the rules well, she needs to be taught from the beginning. Seeing that this newbie has served Mimi, Ben Gong will not punish her heavily. Someone send her to Clear Dew Workshop to learn the rules." Song Lan's face instantly paled. Clear Dew Lane. It had a nice name, but anyone who had been in the palace for a few years knew that it was the most filthy place. Palace maids who made mistakes were sent there not to learn the rules, but to be abused by the old eunuchs who were in charge. Song Lan didn't dare to turn her head. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist begging for mercy from her mistress. That would make her soft-hearted and she would lower her head and apologize to the empress in front of all these palace consorts. This was probably the empress' original intention. Song Lan bit her lip and lowered her head deeply. She didn't make a sound. There was only one thought in her mind. She couldn't beg for mercy, she couldn't let the empress have her wish. Just at this time she heard a gasp. "Nyang nyang." Immediately after, there was a commotion beside her. Everyone squeezed behind her. Song Lan dazedly turned her head to look and saw Shui Guifei being propped up by a crowd of palace servants. Her head drooped to the side and she had fainted. "Nyang nyang." Seeing this scene, Rui Empress paused for a moment. Then she thought that Shui Guifei was pretending. She wouldn't have fainted so easily. She couldn't help but laugh in anger. She thought that the once proud Shui Liangdi would use such an unconventional tactic. Rui Empress felt indescribably proud. After calming down, Rui Empress methodically started to order the palace servants around her. She pretended to be anxious and said, "Quick, send Shui Guifei back to Zhongchui Palace and then call for the Tai." She hadn't expected that Shui Guifei's fainting in the Imperial Garden wasn't a defense, but a counterattack. A counterattack that had been silent for 3 years. Emperor Zhao Qing of the Hall of Tai and was discussing the matter of the Lifebreaker with the head supervisor. They had just talked about the continuous murders in Taisha Library. "Have you found the culprit?" Emperor Zhao Qing wasn't looking for Shui Rui, who was in charge of the case, but the person in charge of the Celestial Commissioner's office. If someone who didn't know the truth was here, they would find it strange. But there was only the ruler and the official in the room. There wasn't even a Taijian to serve tea and grind ink. "There is some progress," Zhu Muzhao said. According to the reports of the 2 spies that this official left in Taisha Library, the culprit must be hiding in the library. The most suspicious person is an old servant that does odd jobs in the library. This official has already sent people to keep an eye on him. When we find out who is the mastermind, we can catch them all in one fell swoop. When Emperor Zhao Qing heard the news, he wasn't happy. "Can't we capture the culprit and interrogate him? Quickly kill those traitors so that the troublemaker dies and the Shan Nu Lu Ren book can see the light of day again." "Your Majesty, do not be impatient," Zhu Muzhao urged. "This matter cannot be rushed." Emperor Zhao Qing became silent. He looked at the official who had advanced and retreated with him in the past, the official who had helped him ascend to the throne. Thinking of the future, his emotions wavered. The atmosphere in the room had just become quiet when a report came from outside the hall. "Your Majesty, there is an emergency." Emperor Zhao Qing frowned and summoned the person in. He didn't avoid Zhu Muzhao. The eunuch who came to deliver the message kowtowed and entered the room. He hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, Imperial Consort Nyang Yang has fainted in the Imperial Garden." The imperial physician diagnosed that imperial consort Nyang Yang is pregnant and is suffering from anxiety. I'm afraid that the dragon seed will be lost. The eunuch said the last few words with a trembling voice. He was afraid that if he said a word too much, it would be the same as losing his life. Emperor Zhaoqing sat there in a daze. He suddenly stood up and walked out anxiously. In the blink of an eye he was out the door. Chapter 640. The news that noble consort Shui had been contradicted by the Empress Taijin and fainted in the imperial garden quickly spread through the palace. When Emperor Zhaoqing hurried to Zhongcui Palace, there was a crowd of consorts and noble women in the outer hall. Not a single one of the women that had been in the imperial garden 2 hours ago was missing. They had all been kept here by the Empress. It had to be said that the worst person right now was Rui Empress. Originally, she had planned on destroying noble consort Shui's reputation in front of others to cover the momentum of Kunling Bureau replacing her. Who would have thought that noble consort Shui had come prepared and purposefully ran into her gun? Great, noble consort Shui had miscarried. After the Tai had examined her, they all had bitter expressions and said that the breathing was unstable. If noble consort Shui really miscarried, she wouldn't be able to escape the blame. She wouldn't be able to explain herself. At this critical moment, she really didn't know if she should hope that the dragon seed in noble consort Shui's belly would be preserved or not. Seeing Emperor Zhaoqing stride in, Rui Empress shook and brought a room full of women to greet him. Your Majesty. Before they could finish, Emperor Zhaoqing raised a hand to interrupt them. Ignoring them, he walked straight into the inner hall. Emperor Zhaoqing saw the unconscious noble consort Shui on the bed and called over the Taiyan palace maids to ask what had happened. His face was so black it could wipe shoes. When Rui Empress saw him come out with a cold expression, she knew it wasn't good. Before Emperor Zhaoqing could question her, she blamed herself. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. That chamberlain that rudely offended Guifei's chamberlain, Qin Xie, already had people drag her away to be flogged. Speaking of this, Qin Xie is to blame. At the time, I was happily chatting with my Mimi in the garden and didn't notice Guifei had come. The people below didn't know that Guifei was delicate and stupidly blocked her path. That's why she was so angry. Sigh. Rui Empress sighed as she spoke. Sun Guiren, who was standing behind her, softly followed up. Yes, Your Majesty, how could we have known that Guifei Nyang was pregnant? Normally, Rui Empress knew Emperor Zhaoqing's temper. 1. He liked the new and hated the old. 2. He hated people hiding things. With her explanation, it was more like noble consort Shui knew she was pregnant but hid it and purposefully ran to the imperial garden to cause trouble. With Sun Guiren's support, even if Emperor Zhaoqing blamed her, he wouldn't reprimand her in public. Who knew that after Emperor Zhaoqing finished listening to the two, his anger didn't subside but rose. With a wave of his sleeve, he brushed off the porcelain cup on the tea table. He said angrily to Rui Empress, she is a Guifei and her rank is just below you in the Hogong. Yet she can't even stroll in the flower garden and has to endure the harassment of your servants. How absurd. Men, tie up all the evil servants of the Empress. Every one of them shall be flogged 20 times, no less. Rui Empress would never have thought that noble consort Shui hadn't run to the imperial garden on her own, but Emperor Zhaoqing had said it first. Now Rui Empress was going to say that something had happened to noble consort Shui because she had run to the imperial garden on her own. Wasn't that slapping Emperor Zhaoqing's face? Emperor Zhaoqing hadn't finished venting his anger when he turned his head to see Sun Guiren's aggrieved state. He didn't feel pity, but felt that she and Rui Empress were birds of the same feather. Just now they had been trying to fool him. You are just a little noble person. Even if noble consort is pregnant, do I have to send someone to notify you beforehand? You really don't know etiquette, don't know what it means. From today onwards, Zhen will move out of Xixia Palace. That is the place of Defei's palace. How can it be sullied by an immoral woman like you? Sun Guiren was completely dumbstruck. Move out of Xixia Palace? The emperor wanted to remove her position? Rui Empress was also frightened by Emperor Zhaoqing's outburst. Before she could react to save her, she had someone invite her out of Zhongcui Palace. Sun Guiren, who had knelt on the ground and cried for forgiveness, was forcefully dragged away by 2 strong palace maids. Zhongcui Palace was noisy for a while before quickly returning to silence. Emperor Zhaoqing returned to the room and sat down in front of noble consort Shui's couch. He held the soft hair hanging by her side and lowered his head to look at her bloodless face. He was dazed. This situation seemed familiar. 3 years ago she had also been like this. She had mysteriously lost the child in her womb. He knew that the fault wasn't on her, but he couldn't even help her vent. He could only secretly visit her in the dead of night. As the emperor sitting on the dragon throne, there were times when he had no other choice. Back then, when the 10th princess fell off a building and died unexpectedly, he had investigated clearly who had done this behind the scenes and framed the Shui family. His 7th prince, Lu Hao, had been so audacious as to scheme against his royal sister and murder his own kin. But he couldn't punish this bastard. Instead, he had to cover up his crimes and make the Shui family the scapegoat. This wasn't because he loved Lu Hao so much that he couldn't tell right from wrong, but because he couldn't go against the teachings of his ancestors. Other than the successive celestial commissioner's advice, few people knew that every new emperor would go to the imperial ancestral temple to listen to the teachings of the holy ancestor on the day he ascended the throne. He clearly remembered the most glorious day of his life more than 10 years ago. Wearing a dragon robe and imperial canopy, the officials bowed to him. He held a heart full of ambition and stepped into the imperial ancestral temple and knelt in front of the ancestral tablets. Emperor Zhaoqing's thoughts couldn't help but drift away. The storm in the palace wasn't deliberately suppressed. That night the news leaked out of the palace. When they heard the news, the most worried was Empress Rui's family, the Zhongyong Count. Count Rui couldn't sit still. He immediately used the excuse that the countess wasn't feeling well to send someone to the junior supervisor Fu to find his eldest daughter, the wife of the junior supervisor, Ren Ruishi. As the eldest daughter, Rui Hongxia was more than 10 years older than her youngest sister, Rui Zizhu. She was twice her age. She wasn't as beautiful as her sisters. When she was middle-aged, she looked like a dignified woman. Her features were similar to Empress Rui in the palace. "Father, why are you in such a hurry to find me?" Ren Ruishi walked into the dining hall. Seeing her father's frown, she guessed, "Did something happen to the empress in the palace?" Count Rui gave her a summary of what had happened in the palace this afternoon. Ren Ruishi finally knew the severity of the situation. Not only was noble consort Shui pregnant, she took the opportunity to attack her aunt, the empress. The emperor was so angry that he punished the empress's palace servants and even punished Sun Gurin, who had finally gained favor. Now their plan to have the empress raise a stepson was ruined. Emperor Zhaoqing had been ill in recent years and the empress was childless. Her authority in the palace was declining day by day. Missing this opportunity, how could they find another? I've long said that the Shui family has evil intentions. That noble consort Shui has endured until now. Father doesn't think so and even planned to marry Zizhu Mimi to their family. Fortunately, this didn't happen, Ren Ruishi couldn't help but say. Seeing Count Rui's expression wasn't good, she changed the topic and urged, "Father, don't panic. It's true that we should quickly think of a countermeasure. If this continued, no matter which prince Emperor Zhaoqing appointed as the heir apparent, as long as Ruishi still sat on the position of empress, the Count Fu would be a thorn in the other's side. Most likely, after the new emperor ascended the throne, the first thing he would do would be to attack the Count Fu. After that, there would be no place for the Rui family in the capital." Count Rui said, "Your aunt sent someone to send a letter. She has an idea to deal with the urgent matter and wants me to make a decision. I just can't decide whether it's good or bad, so I asked you to participate." "Then what does Auntie mean?" Count Rui raised his head to look at his eldest daughter and said, "Today, it seems that the emperor is biased towards noble consort Shui. It's hard to guarantee that there won't be some fence-sitters in court that will fall to the 9th prince's side tomorrow. Moreover, the 9th prince is about to get married. Among the princes, only Ning Wang has more prestige than him. However, Ning Wang is grounded in his mansion, allowing the 9th prince to outshine him. Your aunt wants us to think of a way to make Ning Wang leave the mansion early to suppress the 9th prince's power." Ren Ruishi immediately understood. It wasn't just the Rui family that couldn't tolerate the Shui family's rise in power. There was also Ning Wang Fu. "Go back and mention this to your son-in-law. Tell him about noble consort Shui's pregnancy. The empress has been implicated because of this and your mother is ill. Ask him if he has any way to smooth things over," Count Rui instructed his eldest daughter. Even though his eldest son-in-law was inflexible, he was still a smart person. It might not be easy for him to abuse his power for personal gain, but in this situation, if he was asked for help, he definitely wouldn't refuse his father-in-law. As the adjutant of the Celestial Commissioner, Ren Qiming had the right to ask about the rewards and punishments of the imperial family. It wouldn't be difficult for him to have Ning Wang release his house arrest early. Ren Ruishi thought about her husband's cold face and then looked at her father's confident face. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. After they were done talking about business, Count Rue asked his eldest daughter to visit his youngest daughter's room. He said with some hatred, "This girl, your mother slightly revealed that she was going to marry into the Shui clan, and she's already taken a liking to that brat Shui Rue. Now that the marriage has failed, she's actually hiding in her room without eating or drinking. What a good-for-nothing. Go teach her a lesson on my behalf. Turn her around as soon as possible, lest she embarrasses me when she goes out in the future." Ren Ruishe went to the rear courtyard to talk to Rue Zizhu. The sisters hadn't seen each other for a long time. When Ren Ruishe saw Rue Zizhu, she could see that she had lost a lot of weight. Her eyes were dark and she looked listless. She was shocked. "What's going on? How did you end up like this?" When she married out, her younger sister was still a baby. They didn't spend much time together, but the elder sister was like a mother. Every time Ren Ruishe obtained something good, she would never forget to send a portion to the Fu. When they saw each other, they would talk to each other gently. So when Rue Zizhu saw her, she couldn't help but cry. "Jie, help me ask father why the marriage with the Shui family couldn't go through. What is wrong with me that he dislikes me?" The little girl was stubborn. Ren Ruishe had been young and could understand her feelings. Moreover, she had seen the Dalong of the Shui family before. He was a handsome scholar that could make girls fall head over heels for him. Ren Ruishe gave a look and asked all the servant girls in the room to leave. She closed the door and coaxed her, "Silly girl, you are beautiful and have been sensible since you were young. How could you be disliked by others? In my opinion, it is the Dalong of the Shui family who doesn't deserve you. Don't cry. Your little face is all wrinkled from crying." Madame Ren quickly appeased Rue Zizhu and called her personal servant girl to fetch water. She personally helped Rue Zizhu wash her face and said jokingly, "You've only seen that Shui Rue a few times and talked to him a few times. How would you know what kind of person he is? It's not to the point where you have to be a ruler. Believe it or not, if you don't think about him for a while and stop crying, it won't be long before you even remember what he looks like." Rue Zizhu's mind became clearer after crying. Hearing her elder sister's words, she didn't refute. She just said sadly, "You don't have to say nice words to coax me. I know it's my own wishful thinking. Eldest brother of the Shui family already has someone else in his heart. I just don't feel reconciled. How can I be inferior to him?" Chapter 641. The dragon fetus in noble consort Shui's belly was saved. Emperor Zhaoqing was overjoyed and sent a large pile of rewards to Zhongcui Palace. No matter how many women in the palace were jealous, Empress Rue was completely quiet. Emperor Zhaoqing forbade the people in the palace from talking too much about the shocking fetus in the imperial garden, but allowed her to summon her family members into the palace to talk. However, old Madame Shui had passed away and Prime Minister Shui's family was small in population. They didn't have many women. In the end, only Xiang Wangfei and Shui's second Tai, ex-Ensure, were summoned into the palace. Prime Minister Shui lost his wife in his middle years and did not remarry. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters. In the eyes of others, the 2 daughters were good fortune. One was honored as a noble consort, the other as a Wangfei. Madame Xan was summoned to the palace in a daze. When she heard the good news, her head felt heavy and her feet felt light as she walked out of the palace. When she got home, she repeated what the imperial consort had said to Second Master Shui. Nyang didn't mention anything else. She only said that we don't have to worry about the marriage of the eldest young master of the Fu. I didn't dare to ask. I thought, could it be that Nyang already has a candidate in mind and is just waiting for His Majesty to appoint the marriage? Second Master Shui was an assistant minister of the Ministry of War. He was about 40 this year. His face was pale and beardless, his body slightly plump. At first glance, he didn't look like someone who would lead troops, but more like a country gentleman. No one could tell that he had followed Prime Minister Shui to the southwest when he was 14 or 15. When Yang said this, was Wang Fei present? Second Master Shui asked out of the blue. Yes. Xan sure looked at her master's expression and couldn't help but ask, didn't Taiguoi have intentions of marrying a girl from the Rue family to the eldest young master? Second Master Shui smiled indifferently. Where did you hear that? Why would our family have a marriage alliance with the Count Fu? Xan sure stilled. Didn't Taiguoi want me to investigate the character of Miss Zizhu in the Count Fu? A few months ago, during a family banquet, Prime Minister Shui called the 2 members of the second branch to him and mentioned that there was a young lady in the Earl's mansion who was yet to be betrothed. The implication was that he wanted Xians to pay a visit and find out what was going on. Prime Minister Xue's Fu was very different from other families. The main residence was managed by a few housekeepers. The second branch had moved out early to start their own business. So the Xue family only had women who could go out to socialize. Xan Shi was the only one left. Even though the assistant minister's wife's status wasn't very high, Xan Shi still went to the countess's mansion twice. She didn't see Rui Zizhu in person, which meant that she had brought Rui Zizhu with her. The countess didn't seem to be unhappy about it. But who would have thought that before the marriage could even be properly brought up, it would go down the drain for no reason? Second Master Xue glanced at her and said, "Who said that it must be done after you inquired? Didn't you find a few girls for Guangsu? Do you want your son to marry all of them?" Madame Xian's face reddened. She said defiantly, "What are you talking about, master? How can Su be compared to his eldest cousin brother? Eldest young master is the eldest grandson who will inherit the family business in the future. How can we allow the marriage to be so casual? If the bride's family misunderstands, wouldn't they complain? Other families in the capital might fight over the family business, but the Xue family didn't have to worry about this. Old Master Xue had always been a man of his word. When his two sons started their own families, he kicked the younger one out and divided the family property. It was obvious that he wanted the eldest son to inherit the family business. Later, when the eldest son died, he didn't even mention the matter of bringing the younger son back to the Fu. Instead, he focused on cultivating the eldest grandson and didn't even give the second branch a chance to have other thoughts. Such a simple and crude way of managing the family had once attracted the attention of all the rich families in Anling City. Of course, there were different opinions. Hee. Second Master Xue just laughed this time. He looked at his shrewd wife and didn't say anything. He was afraid that his extremely clever eldest nephew would mistakenly think that the old master really wanted him to marry the daughter of the Rui family so that he could marry into the earl's mansion, settle the unjust case of the 10th princess falling off the building, and get along well with the empress. But he had always known that this was impossible. Just because of this, his Guifei Mimi in the palace would never agree to this marriage. For their eldest brother's only son to marry the empress niece, it was a fantasy. How could he not know how stubborn his eldest sister was? Many years ago there was an accident. His second sister was confused and caused it. Old master. Madame Xan called back second Master Xue, who was reminiscing about the past. We don't have to worry about young Master Xue. Father and her ladyship are looking at him. It's our sewer who should be worried, Madame Xan said with a worried face. Our child will be 17 in 2 months. Qing Bai's marriage will be delayed. As the younger brother, how can he be one step ahead of us? Even if I want to look for a girl, I have to do it secretly. I'm afraid that father will be unhappy if he finds out. If I wait for another year or two, I'm afraid that the girls I like will all be chosen. Second Master Xue also had a headache when he thought of his son. But it wasn't his son's marriage that he was worried about. Let's put it this way. The more successful his eldest brother's Cheng Bai was, the more disappointing his son was. At such a young age, Xue Rui was already a 5th-rank official with 2 ranks of Jinshi. He could enter and leave the imperial court and had a reputation. Xue Guangxu was neither good at literature nor martial arts. He couldn't bear the hardships of learning martial arts. He was not suited for studying. He only knew how to get into trouble all day long. The young master of my Xue family doesn't have to worry about marriage. There were countless families in Anling who wanted to be related to the Xue family. It was others who were worried. Second Master Xue felt that Madame Xan was worrying for nothing. If you have time to ask about this nonsense, why don't you discipline your precious son? He runs around all day long. Even I, as his father, don't know what he is busy with. Madame Xan didn't want to listen to him scolding her son. She stood up and glared at him. She said, I don't know what you're doing. Every time you see him, you scold him with a straight face. He was so scared that he didn't dare to come close to you. All right, I will send someone to find him. Master, please take an afternoon nap. I scolded him for his own good, Second Master Xue muttered. Seeing Madame Xan lift the curtain and leave, he sighed inwardly. He thought that he only had one son in his life. If he could be half as smart as Xue Rui, how could he bear to scold him? In the early years, the princes were young and the situation was unclear. The old master was happy to see that Qing Bai and Ning Wang were on good terms, so he had tacitly allowed Su to run behind them. Who would have thought that Qing Bai and Ning Wang would turn against each other? That silly boy couldn't even tell. The 9th prince had already returned to Jing, but he was still trying to get closer to Ning Wang. How could he not be angry? Yushu heard the good news of Imperial Consort Shui the next day. It wasn't that someone specially came to inform her. The news came from Su Qing when she was strolling in the Celestial Commissioner's office. Since Yushu had 2 more bodyguards by her side, they went to the Celestial Commissioner's office during the day. She didn't order them to guard the door, but sent them to walk around the office as eyes and ears. Lu Hong and Su Qing relied on their famous names. Other than some places, the Celestial Commissioner was unimpeded and could go anywhere. After a few days, they became familiar with each other and gradually brought back some useful or useless news for Yushu. I heard from a Changji in the Imperial Secretariat that the palace sent out an edict last night. They were to choose 1,000 virgin jade coins and use pearl silk to weave a picture of the moon on the sea and send it to the palace. It was said that the emperor was preparing it for the imperial consort during the mid-autumn festival banquet. Su Qing repeated what she said. Yushu pondered for a while and felt that it was strange. Virgin jade coins and pearl silk were both auspicious items. They were recorded in the half of the list of strange and rare objects that the Xan family gave her. The former was a fine jade the size of a copper coin and hung on the neck of a baby boy who was less than 100 days old. It absorbed the red yang qi and took 81 days to form one. The latter was a rare pearl silk spit out by a pearl silkworm. It looked like a silver thread and was extremely flexible. It was a tribute to the emperor. Pearl silk was fine. The emperor was happy to use the precious silk made of 1 tael of gold to weave a flower pattern for his favorite concubine. At most, she would sigh with emotion that Imperial Consort Shui's favor never waned. However, it was thought-provoking to use virgin jade coins. If she remembered correctly, this thing was always worn by the concubines who were pregnant in the palace to comfort the fetus. In other words, noble Consort Shui was pregnant. After Yushu concluded, she immediately felt that this was good news. In order to confirm this matter, she approved a few marriage invitations in the afternoon and left them for Jing Chen to stamp tomorrow morning. Without waiting for the sunset bell to ring, she ran to the Supreme Court to find Shui Rui to verify. They were both government offices. The Supreme Court was not far away. When Yushu walked past the bell tower, Lu Hong led her horse over. He bowed his arm and helped her, who was wearing a loose robe, onto the saddle. He then turned around and mounted his own official horse. He and Su Qing followed closely on her left and right, unimpeded out of the main gate of the Celestial Commissioner's office. Su Qing rode on the back of a tall horse, turning his head to look at the gradually diminishing figures of the guards on duty under the huge wooden gate. Just 2 months ago he was like these ordinary people, standing guard day and night, being transferred from one gate to another. His eyes were blocked by the high walls of the city gate, as if he would never be able to see the day when he would be able to get out of the city. Su Qing ran for a while and found that he was lagging behind Lu Hong. He quickly followed. Yushu hadn't arrived at the Supreme Court when she saw Shui Rui's official sedan on the way. It seemed like he had just come out from the government office and was about to go somewhere else. Lu Hong stepped forward and stopped her. Shui Rui pushed aside the cloth curtain and looked outside. Seeing it was Yushu, he had the sedan bearers put down the sedan and stopped by the roadside to talk to her. "Where are you going?" "I was just about to make a trip home." Shui Rui leaned half of his arm against the window of the sedan chair. His docile mare named Little Red lowered its head and sniffed at him fawningly. He reached out to block its huge head and rubbed its cheek. Little Red shyly turned its head away. A moment ago, someone from the Fu had come to the Yamen. Grandfather had told him to go back. He didn't know what had happened. Yushu leaned down and asked in a small voice, "I heard that the Guifei is pregnant?" Shui Rui was surprised for a moment. "What? You didn't know?" Yushu was a little disappointed, thinking that she had misheard. Chapter 642. Yushu came to Wangji Tower and asked what Xan Lishan was doing as usual. "Mr. Xan has been in the furnace room for a day. Do you want to go and have a look?" Xan Lishan promised to make Tishio incense for Yushu. Because the tedious refining process couldn't be done by others, all the spices and herbs were semi-finished. Yushu simply asked people to clean up an empty room on the first floor of the backyard and added all the tools according to Xan Lishan's requirements. Since then he stayed in the room for half a month and she didn't see him every time she came. Yushu waved her hand and went upstairs. The private room on the second floor had prepared her clothes, shoes and socks for the season. She changed out of her official robe, washed her face and lay on the bed in the middle of the hall. She asked Xiao Qing to make a pot of frozen spring marrow. This was a treasure that only Wangji Tower had. The tea was cold but not greasy. The green liquid was like wine and had a faint sweetness just like wine. After drinking a cup of tea, Yu Shu felt much more relaxed. These 2 days she had been dealing with the Kunling Bureau's stacks of marriage documents. In order to figure out who the girl was, she had been researching the marriage relationships of the rich families in Enling City. She felt dizzy. "Miss, you must be tired. Why don't you take a nap? I'll wake you up when it's time for dinner." Xiao Dai squatted and massaged Yu Shu's legs. Seeing that Yu Shu's eyes were half closed and opened them from time to time, Xiao Dai persuaded her. Yu Shu thought about how Shui Rui had to return to the Prime Minister's residence and it would take at least night for him to return. Thus she answered with an N and closed her eyes. Little Qing quickly went into the room to get a soft blanket and came out to cover Yu Shu with it. Shui Rui changed his clothes and hastily entered the study room. Only then did he realize that Shui Lingnan wasn't the only one waiting for him. Lu Tan was sitting beside the tea table by the window, and he raised his head and smiled at Shui Rui. Shui Rui stood in front of the door and raised his hand to salute. When he was about to greet him, he heard him say, "Cousin is finally back. Come in, no need to be so polite in your own home." "I didn't know Wang Ye was coming. Sorry for not going out to greet you," Shui Rui said with a smile. He saw that the teacup in front of Lu Tan was no longer smoking. Obviously, he had been here for a long time and the gatekeeper did not greet him. It seemed that he had come in from the side door. After being conferred the title of Wang Ye, Lu Tan, as a prince, he could not casually visit other people's mansions. Even his maternal grandfather's house, he could not come as he pleased. This was a matter of manners. "Sit down and talk." Shui Lingnan pointed at the chair opposite Lu Tan and asked Shui Rui to sit down. He said to Shui Rui, "You didn't return home yesterday." Today there was good news from the palace that the imperial consort is pregnant. "Sit down and talk." Shui Lingnan pointed to the chair opposite to Lu Tan and asked Shui Rui to sit. He said, "You didn't come home yesterday. Today there is good news from the palace. Imperial consort Nyang Yang is pregnant." He looked at Lu Tan who was sitting next to him with a smile on his face. "Congratulations, Wang Ye." Shui Rui congratulated him. Imperial consort Shui's pregnancy was a happy event for the entire Shui family. It was even more beneficial to Lu Tan. Regardless of whether the child was a boy or a girl, Imperial consort Shui's position in the inner palace would be even more stable. Now the child depended on the mother. The empress had no children. Consort De died early. Consort Shu was not favored. Consort Xian was demoted. No matter how glorious Imperial consort Shui was in her early years, she was no longer as delicate and favored as the young palace maids. Who would have thought that after more than 10 years she would be pregnant again? It was really unexpected. For the Shui family and the 9th prince this was great news. For others it was bad news. Shui Lingnan continued, "This morning your second aunt went to the palace to visit her ladyship. I heard from her ladyship that the pregnancy was diagnosed yesterday. The emperor did not mention it in court. It seemed that he was waiting for the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet to announce the good news. It's fine if you know about this. Don't go out and announce it to others." "Yeah. Why is grandfather sighing?" Shui Rui asked despite knowing the answer. Shui Lingnan only shook his head. Lu Tan continued, "It's like this. I heard that news leaked from the palace. Mu Fei encountered the empress in the imperial garden yesterday and fainted from anger. This alerted Fu Huang and was diagnosed to be pregnant. Because of this, the emperor punished all the servants in the empress palace, harshly shaming the central palace. He also punished a few nobles, causing people to harbor resentment. I don't know when there will be more trouble. Right now Mu Fei's pregnancy is not stable. I'm afraid she has been plotted against." Shui Rui heard his worry and did not think much. He thought that Guifei had really fainted in front of the empress. It was 80% intentional. With his aunt's scheming, if she could not protect the child in her belly, she would not act rashly. But he did not hide his words from Lu Tan. He followed along and said, "Wang Ye's worry is reasonable. It's just that her ladyship is in the palace. We are not at ease but have no way to do anything." Lu Tan had made a special trip here. How could he be done with just a few words of complaint? He had said things so clearly in front of his grandfather. It was clear that he had something he needed his help with. "What do you mean by having no way to do anything? Has cousin forgotten Lianfang, miss? She is currently working in the Kunling Bureau and is related to the inner palace. Why not ask her to help Mu Fei predict fortune and misfortune? Only then can grandfather and I be at ease." As expected, Lu Tan had set his sights on Yu Shu. Shui Rui did not need to ask in detail to know what he was planning. Originally, Lu Tan had called himself Prince Jing and privately recruited Yu Shu, a 5th-level female official. Although it was not easy, it was not difficult. It just so happened that Yu Shu had been in the limelight at the Land and Water Conference and received the favor of Emperor Zhao Qing. She had obtained a title bestowed by the emperor and was praised by others. This was not something that Lu Tan could move. There was such a rare talent in front of him that he could not use. How could Lu Tan be satisfied? After going around in a circle, he could only start with Shui Rui. Chapter 643. In reality, what Lu Tan did was smart. He wanted to use Yu Shu, but he was selling a favor to Shui Rui. Unfortunately, the Shui family and Jing Wangfu were in the same boat. Shui Rui was selling a favor for nothing. Shui Rui understood and calmly looked at Lu Tan. He turned his head to ask Shui Lingnan, "What does grandfather think should be done?" Shui Lingnan replied, "The matters of the Hogong, us foreign officials should not interfere. But the child in your Jiumu's womb is of great importance and cannot be neglected." He didn't finish his words. Shui Rui saw a deeper meaning in his eyes. His heart jumped and he couldn't help but think. There were many Feipin in the Hogong. Above Guifei there was only one empress. If Guifei successfully gave birth, her contributions would be even more prominent. If at this time something happened to the empress, then the empress, who was childless and lacking in virtue, would definitely be impeached by the imperial censors. When the position of empress was empty, among the women in the Hogong, who would have the qualifications to advance further? Shui Rui lightly pursed his lips. Looking at Lu Tan's still young and inexperienced face, he guessed that he definitely hadn't thought of this layer. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to sit still long ago and wouldn't have had the thought to use him. "Grandfather, don't worry." Faced with such a situation, Shui Rui could only agree. Shui Lingnan looked at him with satisfaction. He turned his head to say to Lu Tan, "After the Mid-Autumn Festival, it will be Wang Ye's grand wedding. I only hope that it will be perfect." Lu Tan smiled and said, "At that time, grandfather must drink a few more cups of grandson's wedding wine." Shui Rui watched from the side as the grandfather and grandson talked about an off-topic topic. One had a pleasant expression, the other was close. It was completely a scene of children and grandchildren being happy. But he was like an outsider watching coldly from the side. Yu Shu was not in a deep sleep. She could hear some movement in the room. Even with her eyes closed, she could feel someone sitting in front of her. She was originally lying on her back, but when she opened her eyes, she saw Shui Rui sitting on a chair a foot away from her. Not far away there was a dim gauze lamp under the window. With only a few inches of light she could barely see him clearly. "Are you awake?" Yu Shu sat up slowly. She tucked her messy hair behind her ears. He reached for the teacup on the table. Shui Rui picked up the teapot before her and refilled half of the tea in her cup. After quenching her thirst, Yu Shu propped her head up and looked at him. "What happened at home?" Shui Rui replied, "The imperial consort is indeed pregnant." Yu Shu sat up straight and her eyes widened. "Really?" Shui Rui nodded. At first Yu Shu was amused. Then she found that he didn't seem to be smiling. She asked, "What, you are not happy?" Shui Rui asked her in turn, "Why are you so happy?" "This is a good thing," Yu Shu stated matter-of-factly to him. "First, I am a female imperial official at Kunling Bureau. Whichever Nyang in the palace is favored will affect me. Of the Empress and the other Feipin, I favor the imperial consort the most. Now that she has the grace of the emperor, of course I am happy to see it happen. Second, I don't want to see Ning Wang gain power. Of course, it's better if the 9th prince gains power." Hearing her honest words, Shui Rui sighed. "You are really honest." Yu Shu poked him. "It's your turn to speak. Why aren't you happy?" Shui Rui could have used a roundabout way to tell her what Lu Tan had entrusted to him, and first made it clear that he was in a difficult position and that he had no choice. He did not want her to think that he had any intention of doing anything for her, but he did not. He told her just as plainly, "I want you to help divine fortune for the imperial consort and ensure the safety of the child in her womb." The people outside all thought that she could predict life and death. Only he knew her background. What she was truly skilled at was determining fortune and misfortune. Shui Rui was more confident than Lu Tan. As long as she was willing to put effort into this matter, then the child in the imperial consort's womb would be safe. Absolutely safe. Also, this was a shortcut. A shortcut that could free him from the heavy shackles that were the Shui family. Yu Shu considered for a moment before agreeing. Yes, I want to know the imperial consort's birthday. Tomorrow I will divine for her until she gives birth. She readily agreed. Shui Rui didn't feel relaxed. He said in a low voice, think carefully. Participating in this matter is different from you agreeing to tamper with the Book of Kuan. Yu Shu didn't understand the hidden meaning in his words. In her opinion, these two things were both to help imperial consort Shui. What difference could there be? Shui Rui patiently explained to her. Once you start to divine for the imperial consort and find out that someone is plotting against her, I want you to tell me the details as soon as possible. Think about it now. Who doesn't want to see the imperial consort give birth safely? Prince Ning? The first person that Yu Shu thought of was the two-faced dog lord. If you can know in advance when Prince Ning will make a move, how much chance do you think you can make him go for wool and come home shorn? Yu Shu's eyes brightened. This was the drama where Prince Ning failed to send someone to harm the imperial consort. After the matter was exposed, he was stripped of his title and driven out of the capital by the emperor in a rage. 3 years ago, there was no evidence that Prince Ning framed the 10th princess. As time passed, it was difficult to pursue it. This time, if I can catch Prince Ning in the act, I won't let him go. Shui Rui said in a low voice and asked her, think again. Well, the Empress? Yes, there's also the Empress, Shui Rui said slowly. The Empress has been in charge of the 6 palaces for more than 10 years. She has no children. There are 7 laws. When a woman reaches 50 years of age and has no children, she can choose a concubine as the eldest. If the wife is not virtuous, she shall be abandoned. Her Majesty is 47 years old this year, a little older than the Emperor. It seems that it is difficult for her to have a child. She is nearly 50 years old. Seeing that the imperial consort is pregnant, she is more anxious than anyone else. If she harms the imperial consort and this matter is exposed, she will be impeached. Think again. If the Empress is deposed, which consort is most likely to be promoted by the Emperor? The imperial consort, Yu Shu swallowed. In this way, wouldn't Lu Tan directly become the first prince? Then what's the point of others fighting for? What's there to fight for? So, no matter which one of them harms the imperial consort, it can shake the entire court. Now do you know what it means to be involved in this matter? It's fine if it succeeds, but if it fails, can you bear the consequences? After she heard Shui Rui's explanation, Yu Shu noticed that she was still thinking too simply. If she agreed to help him calculate the fortune and misfortune of the imperial consort, then she would have completely boarded the pirate ship, and it would be difficult for her to get off it. In history, there were only 2 outcomes for those who failed in the fight for the throne: death and a life worse than death. This caused her to hesitate. Compared to Ning Wang becoming the crown prince, she was more willing to see Lu Tan become the crown prince. Otherwise, she would not have been so willing to help Shui imperial consort alter the Book of Great Earth and ignore the Empress and Shu Fei. However, she did not forget that the starting point of everything she did was to escape the death trap of the person who broke the fate, to preserve her life. But who knew how long it would take for Lu Tan to sit on the throne after he became the crown prince? It was hard to say whether or not the emperor would deal with her in this period of time. Whether or not Lu Tan would become the crown prince, whether or not he would become the emperor in the future. In the end, it could not determine whether or not she could keep her little life. Was there a need for her to take such a risk for an unnecessary matter? If it was someone else, they would definitely consider this question for a few days, but for Yu Shu, who often toyed with probability, it was just the time it took to drink a sip of tea. Dagu, you don't have to scare me. I'll do it. Come, let's clap hands and agree. Whoever regrets is a bastard. One of her principles was, rather than waiting for death, it was better to take the initiative and attack. Furthermore, she had confidence in Shui Rui. She could divine the mastermind who wanted to harm Guifei, so Shui Rui would definitely be able to make them reveal their true colors. At this time, Yu Shu was still sitting on the soft couch. Her hair, which had just woken up, was loose and disheveled. A tuft of it was sticking up on the top of her head. Her serious appearance of raising her hand and swearing was very silly, but in Shui Rui's eyes, it was extremely cute. Paw. Shui Rui raised his hand and lightly patted the center of her palm, causing a clear sound to resound out, yet he didn't retreat and instead seized the opportunity to hold her entire palm before moving it close to his face and pecking the back of her warm hand, and then he said with a chuckle. Chapter 644. On August 12th, Yu's mansion hosted a banquet. Baochang Street was crowded with people. Most of the guests had arrived at dusk. Fortunately, Shui Rui had arranged 20 diligent servants for her in advance. Otherwise, she would not have been able to receive all of them. After the Water and Land Conference, Yushu became famous. In just a month, even the common people knew that there was a messenger meowing in the court. She had learned the skills of immortals and could summon the wind and rain to help the current sage. There were countless dignitaries in Enling City who wanted to see Yushu, but only a few actually got to see her. Therefore, when there was an opportunity like today, those who got the invitation would not be absent, and those who didn't get the invitation would think of ways to smuggle in. The number of guests was much more than what Yushu had expected. In the end, she had no choice but to add 20 tables at the last minute to accommodate all of them. He Fangji and Pei Jing were helping her to entertain the male guests in the front courtyard while Shui Rui introduced them one by one. Xen Lu came in advance with her mother, second Madame Xen. Before she got married, second Madame Xen was the daughter of the Dong family of the Imperial College. She came from a family of scholars and was very popular. Even without the title of honorary lady, it was enough for her to accompany Zhao Hui to entertain the womenfolk who came today. After all, Yushu's seniority was there. There were not many female guests today. The one with the highest status was Yushu's boss, the wife of Celestial Commissioner Ren Qiming, who had the title of honorary lady Madame Ren Rui. The matrons of the various families had all done their homework before coming and knew a thing or two about Yushu's background. They knew that the amiable-looking and restrained Madame He in front of them was the adoptive mother that Maid Yu had adopted, not her biological mother. Most of them chose to play dumb because they didn't see Yushu's mother. There were also some who were quick with their words. Why didn't I see Madame Yu on such a good day? The room, which was filled with laughter, suddenly became quiet. Zhao Hui was a little slow. When everyone was looking at her, she said with a fake smile, Xiao Yu's mother got a cold yesterday when she went out to the garden. She only took the medicine after prescribing a prescription. She's resting in her room now. Most of the people could tell that this was a perfunctory excuse. Of all times to be sick, she had to be sick at this time. However, when they thought about the identity of this Madame Yu, they realized that she seemed to be a concubine of the down-and-out Yi Shueji family. It was very unpresentable. After Maid Yu had a meteoric rise, it was normal for her to despise her birth mother's background and not want her to see guests. Madame Xn immediately came out to smooth things over. She got sick early in the autumn. She needs to take good care of herself. Otherwise, she won't be able to stand it when the weather turns colder. Everyone nodded in agreement. Originally, the matter was already over, but there was someone who didn't want to let it go. Speaking of Lady Yu, I met her once at Assistant Minister Yin's residence a few months ago. Zhao Hui looked at the woman sitting at the head of the table. She remembered that second Madame Xn had just introduced Madame Ren to her. This Madame Ren was a third-rank lady of honorary title, so she couldn't neglect her. Zhao Hui didn't know how to answer, but someone else answered for her. It was the one who had asked about Aunt Chui just now. So, Lady Yu and Assistant Minister's wife are familiar with each other? Everyone pricked up their ears and heard Madame Ren say with a smile, How would I know that they are familiar with each other? Before Lady Yu got married and had children, she used to be a maid in Madame Yin's house. The two of them were master and servant, and only reunited after more than 10 years. I heard that Madame Yin intended to marry Miss Yu to the third young master of her family. The two families almost became in-laws. At that time, Miss Yu had just taken the Dian examination and became Teacher E. Who would have thought that she would have such a good fortune later? Like everyone else, Zhao Hui heard about this for the first time. After Madame Ren finished speaking, she looked at the strange expressions on the faces of the women in the room. Only then did she realize that Madame Ren's words were wrong. What did she mean by Yushu almost married someone? Not to mention whether there was such a thing, she also mentioned that Yushu's future at that time was not what it was today. It made people think that the two families had originally agreed on a marriage, but later Yushu became successful, so she went back on her word. After hearing Madame Ren's words, Yushu almost became a villain who forgot her roots for power. If these words were spread out, how could she talk about marriage in the future? Zhao Hui was an emotional person. When she came to her senses, she instantly blushed with anger. She wanted to refute Madame Ren, but she didn't know where to start. She could only reply with one sentence, I didn't know there was such a thing. Madame Ren was about to speak, but she was interrupted. The third young master of Assistant Minister Yin's house? Did the young supervisor's wife hear it wrong? Xan Lu was a straightforward person. She didn't see second Madame Xan winking at her. She stared at her and said, How could the Lotus Room like him? He's just an ignorant and incompetent playboy with a bad reputation. Bah. With her interruption, everyone finally remembered who the third young master of the Yin family was, and all of them began to feel suspicious. Madame Ren was choked by a little girl and frowned at Xn Lu, who spoke. Second, Madame Xn secretly scolded this wicked girl for being so troublesome. She put on a smile and said to Madame Ren, "This girl has been spoiled by the elders. She doesn't know how to control her words. Lady, please don't blame her for being a child." Since she was a child, Madame Ren didn't want to argue with Xn Lu. She turned to Zhao Hui and said with a smile, "Look, I accidentally said a few more words and made people dislike me. If Madame he doesn't know, just take it as a joke." Although Zhao Hui was angry, she remembered that it was a happy day today. She couldn't argue with a third-ranked lady. It would be worse if it got out of hand. Seeing this, the madams of the other families laughed and skipped the topic. Anyone with eyes could see that Madame Ren was deliberately finding fault. They just didn't know how Maid Messenger you had offended her to the point that she had to come all the way to expose her and embarrass her. Seeing that Zhao Hui didn't dare to argue with her, Madame Ren picked up the teacup in front of her and covered the corner of her mouth with a sneer. She thought, if it wasn't for Sister Zizhu, she wouldn't have shown up today. Who cares if she's a female fortune teller or a meowing messenger? She actually dared to criticize the young lady of the Rue family at the gentleman's hibiscus banquet and ruined her sister's marriage. She really should be taught a lesson. Xn Lu still wanted to interrupt, but second Madame Xn pressed her thigh and gave her a warning stare. Xn Lu was very depressed and found an excuse to go out for a breath of fresh air. Yu Shu was entertaining the guests in the front yard and was flattered by a group of people. Occasionally, someone would notice a maidservant behind Yu Shu who was pouring wine. But because she was fair and lovely, even if someone found her familiar, it was difficult to associate her with the young Onmyoji who came from Dongying at the Aquatic and Land Conference. After a few rounds of wine, Yu Shu used dizziness as an excuse and left the stall to Shui Rue and the others. She retreated to the reception hall to drink a bowl of soup to sober up the hangover. She changed out of her sweaty outer cover and sat with her legs bent under the screen. She asked Biki, who was squatting in front of her and massaging her feet. "Queasy, you saw so many people with me just now. Did anyone show any signs of dying?" "There were many people tonight, and those who came were either rich or noble." Yu Shu brought Biki with her, intending to test her intelligence. "Master, Queasy didn't find anything unusual with the guests. I didn't see anyone emitting a ghostly light." Biki learned the etiquette from Xaner and Lin Her. She spoke the Dan language fluently and became more fluent every day. "Then is there anyone like me who has a light between my eyebrows?" Yu Shu touched her forehead subconsciously. Compared to whether there were any guests who were close to dying, she was more concerned about whether there were other people who had lived two lives like her. Biki shook her head and looked up at Yu Shu. She said respectfully with a serious face, "Master, such an extraordinary person is one in a million." Seeing that she was flattering her so obediently, Yu Shu smiled and patted her head. At this time Xan Lu came over. After sitting for half a cup of tea, Yu Shu listened to Xan Lu talk about the situation of entertaining guests in the backyard. She only raised her eyelids when he talked about Madame Ren. "Madame Ren's way of talking about you is clearly to discredit you. Even I can tell what others will think of you. They will really think that you almost married that rotten Persimmon Jitsong, and now that you have a bright future you look down on him. You should think about how to explain it later. Don't let people misunderstand." Xan Lu liked to fight for justice. Yu Shu heard Madame Ren's criticism of her, but she was not in a hurry to get angry. Instead, she first thought about what she had done to Madame Ren. Thinking it over, she finally remembered something that could make other people come to find her for trouble. 2 months ago at the Dinghua Hall's Hibiscus Gentleman's Banquet, Miss Rue of the Countess Mansion, together with Princess Shiwen and the others, splashed dirty water on her, and in the end they were scolded by her. This young supervisor's wife came from the Countess's mansion. Before she married, she was the eldest daughter of the Rue family, which was also Rue Zizhu's sister. Did the elder sister find an opportunity to help the younger sister vent her anger? Yu Shu thought it was ridiculous and a smile really appeared on her face. "You still laugh? Do you think it's a good thing?" Xan Lu was anxious for her and reached out to hit her. Yu Shu said, "It's not a good thing, but it's not a big deal. Don't worry about me. The innocent will be innocent. Let them talk." Madame Ren really didn't know Yu Shu's background. She thought that by making a few words about her marriage and making people question her character, she could make her unhappy. It wasn't that she didn't care about her reputation, but it depended on what it was related to. For example, at the hibiscus banquet, Commandery Princess Shiwen slandered her and accused her of being unrighteous and unfilial. If it was true that she wanted to affect her future, she would definitely not agree. As for Madame Ren implying that she was snobbish and broke the marriage, it would at most affect her finding a husband. This kind of slander was not painful to her, so she didn't care at all. This was the difference between the knowledge of a woman in the backyard and a woman who was an official in the court. It's fine if you don't worry. Just take it that I'm meddling. Xen Lu saw that she didn't take it seriously, so he couldn't force her to argue with Madame Ren. If he said more, she would be stirring up trouble. The two sat and rested for a while. Yushu took off her loose robe and put on a long satin skirt. She first told Xen Lu to go back, but she arrived a little later. The backyard was placed in the pavilion in the east corner of the garden. When Yushu walked to the door, she was hit by a mixture of various women's incense. It was so suffocating that she lowered her head and sneezed loudly. She heard that the noisy laughter inside suddenly stopped, and a group of female guests in the pavilion looked toward the door. Yushu covered her nose and raised her head with a smile. She raised her hand and bowed to the crowd. "Thank you, madams, for coming to congratulate this little girl today. Please forgive me if I have not been a good host." Chapter 645. Yushu only stayed in the backyard for a short while. She greeted the womenfolk and then went back to the front. This made Madame Ren, who wanted to quarrel with her, lose her plan. Madame Ren had long heard that this female fortune-teller was unwilling to be at a disadvantage. She even dared to scold Royal Princess Shiwen. Madame Ren thought that if someone went to learn from Yushu, she would definitely not let it go. The bigger the trouble, the worse her reputation would be. Unexpectedly, Yushu came in a hurry and left in a hurry, as if she didn't know that someone was talking behind her back. Second Madame Xen saw that Yushu smiled and greeted all the high-ranking women present, and then left as if nothing had happened. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Then Xen Lu came back and quickly pulled her daughter to the corridor and whispered, "Where did you go just now? Mother told you to remember that you can't repeat what Madame Ren said to Miss Yu in front of her." These words could only be told by family members. If others said half a word, it would be deliberately stirring up trouble. Xen Lu said carelessly, "Why didn't you say it earlier?" "I already told her." Second Madame Xen choked and slapped her back. "Who told you to speak too fast?" Xen Lu gritted her teeth in pain, but didn't dare to make a loud noise. She looked at her mother with grievance and was unconvinced. "I'm the best friend of the Lotus Master. Why didn't I tell her when someone said bad things about her behind her back?" Second Madame Xen couldn't do anything to her. It wasn't easy to educate her at home, so she could only wait until they went back to deal with this wicked girl. Thinking of Yushu's normal expression just now, she said to Xen Lu with disappointment, "Learn from others. You only know how to play all day long. You don't have a good memory." After Yushu held a big housewarming banquet, there were more voices in the capital talking about her, the female official. People's focus was obviously different. Some people praised official Yu for her cheerful personality and eclectic personality. Some people secretly criticized her for not being dignified enough and not having the cultivation of a woman. Some people envied Maid Yu for holding an important official position at a young age and that women were not inferior to men. Some people ridiculed her for being too shrewd and arrogant. In short, it's a mixed bag. There was also some gossip mixed in. It was said that female envoy Yu's mother had been a maidservant in Prime Minister Yin's household and was the mistress of the current Assistant Minister Yin of the Ministry of Revenue. After they reunited, Lady Yin didn't mind female envoy Yu's pitiful life and arranged a marriage for her youngest son. At first, female envoy Yu was greedy for power and had agreed. Who would have thought that in just a few months she would enter the court and gain the favor of the emperor? She looked down on the ignorant and incompetent young master of the Yin family and went back on her word. Before this gossip reached Yushu's ears, Madame Yin, who had heard the news, was furious. Assistant Minister Yin wasn't invited to Yushu's housewarming banquet, so Madame Yin naturally didn't attend as well. However, there was no harm in some busybodies running to her for confirmation. When Madame Yin heard that her precious son was placed together with the daughter of that lowly person and was even said to be the daughter of her family who refused to let go of the girl, and in the end she was despised. Even though she knew it wasn't the truth, she was still furious and said without thinking, That kind of lowly person who shows her face in public doesn't even have enough status to be my son's concubine. At that time, she was really muddle-headed to find her son a capable wife who could control him and was easy to manipulate. Madame Yin was so regretful that her teeth itched. Seeing her change in attitude, the busybody quickly found an excuse to leave. However, Madame Yin's anger wasn't appeased. No matter how bad her youngest son was, he was still her biological son. How could others look down on him, especially when he was born out of wedlock by a maidservant? People's thoughts were so strange. There was a kind of preconceived notions. For example, there was a beggar on your street who had been begging for food with a broken bowl for more than 10 years. Then one day he passed by your door on a big horse in bright clothes and said hello to you. No matter how you greeted him with a smile on your face, you must think in your heart, "Humph, he's just a stinky beggar. What's there to show off?" Aunt Shui, who used to be Madame Yin's maidservant, was this stinky beggar in Madame Yin's mind. No matter how good her daughter was, there was always a lingering sense of superiority in Madame Yin's heart. Therefore, after hearing the rumor, Madame Yin selectively ignored Madame Ren, who used her family as a scapegoat. Instead, she blamed Yu Shu and her daughter who didn't know what was good for them. Near the Mid-Autumn Festival, Assistant Minister Yin couldn't get away from the Ministry of Revenue and didn't return home for 2 days. Madame Yin inquired about the address of the Yu's mansion. Without discussing with him, she took advantage of the evil atmosphere and sent someone to Baochang Street to find Aunt Shui to talk about the old days. At the same time, she invited a few ladies and madams who were on good terms to her home for tea. Speaking of which, concubine Shui wasn't able to come out on the day of the banquet at the Yu residence to show off her prestige as the mother of a high-ranking official, so she had been holding back her anger and privately complained to Yu Xiaoxiu. "What's there to be afraid that I'll be shy and make a fool of myself in front of the guests? I think your sister just dislikes me as her mother and doesn't want me to come out to meet people. She told me the truth so that I can go back to my small courtyard and don't make things difficult for her." Of course, this was just a casual remark. Being able to live in this big house as a proper madam and enjoy the treatment of being surrounded by people, Aunt Shui was very unwilling to go back to the past. There was only one bad thing. Yu Xiaoxiu had to go to school every day and went to find Zhao Hui, who was always looking after the child. They didn't go out at all. She didn't even have someone to gossip with. Therefore, when Madame Yin's servant found the gatekeeper of the Yu's mansion and asked someone to go in to inform her, Aunt Shui received the invitation and almost happily asked someone to reply. Aunt Shui freshened up and sent a little servant girl, Xiang Sui, to the front to find someone. When Zhou Hu, who was the steward in the front yard, heard that Madame was going out, he didn't dare to neglect. He immediately asked someone to tie a stable mule cart and chose a clever manservant to follow. Aunt Shui sat in the cart happily and said to Xiang Sui, "You girls only think that I'm a disgrace. Even the wife of the assistant minister came to me for tea." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.